Chapter 523. Boss Su-yi. There were more than a dozen outer disciples present. When they saw Su-yi, they also greeted him warmly, following Zhang-Qing and other greetings. Su-yi knew these disciples. They were all outer disciples of the 36 Sword Peak, including Zhang-Qing and Wang Fan. However, he had never met them in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Later, when the exit was opened, they did not walk out. Finally, they were taken out by the experts of Xinjiang Gate. Every time the Myriad Sword Conference was held, there would be disciples who could not walk out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords by themselves. They needed to be taken out by the experts of Xinjiang Gate. When these disciples saw Su-yi, they were enthusiastic and excited, but also very regretful. They had all heard about the news of Zhang-Qing, Su Jiahui, Wang Fan, and others. They also felt the aura of Zhang-Qing, Su Jiahui, and others skyrocketing. They knew that Zhang-Qing and others had been with Su-yi and were protected by Su-yi. Along the way, they had endless opportunities, and their progress was beyond imagination. However, they did not have that kind of luck. It was very regretful. Su-yi nodded to the crowd. Originally, he was worried that these disciples would have some accidents in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Now it seemed that it was not bad. At least, there were no major accidents. Let's go. Elder, Su should not go to Lingjian Peak. Su Jiahui said. Although there were several duels in the 36 Sword Peaks today, with Elder Su's character, he would not go to Lingjian Peak. He was just wondering whether Elder Su would go with them. It seemed that he would not go. After a while, Su-yi called the Gale Golden Eagle that had been following behind him. He took Zhang-Qing and a dozen other people to Lingjian Peak. Lingjian Peak had always been the place where Xinjiang Gate held grand events. Usually, the grand events and duels between disciples were held on Lingjian Peak. It was said that the Lingjian Peak was protected by a strong person. No matter how strong one was, they could not destroy it. There were 72 peaks in Xinjiang Gate, including Tianjian Peak, Zhangjian Peak, Lingjian Peak, 15 Xinjiang Peak, 18 Daojian Peak, and 36 Sword Peaks. The Sky Sword Peak was the main peak of the Xinjiang Gate. The Hidden Sword Peak was the place where the Xinjiang Gate collected martial skills, sword techniques, and treasured swords. The 15th Mysterious Sword Peak was filled with the energy of heaven and earth. It was the place where the senior disciples of the Xinjiang Gate cultivated. The 18 Sword Mountains had always been very mysterious. It was said that the 18 mountains were occupied by the top experts of the Xinjiang Gate. Occasionally, only the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate could be summoned to cultivate in seclusion. Wow, looks like it's going to be very lively today. On the back of the Zephyr Golden Eagle, Zhang-Qing looked at the densely packed Divine Sword Sect's disciples on the mountain path below. Just like the many Divine Sword Sect's disciples who were riding on flying savage beasts in the sky, he couldn't help but click his tongue. Of course it's going to be lively today. This is a grand event that only happens once every 5 years. I heard that many senior brothers and sisters, as well as some disciples of the Xinjiang Gate who were outside, will also return, Lu Ji said. Cool Carrot, Craftsman Net T /positive S edition. Today is the duel between the strongest disciples of our batch. They're all God's favored ones. At that time, I'm afraid that the ranking on the Sword Pagoda will be rearranged on a large scale. I just don't know who will win the first place in the end. Tan Xiao was looking forward to it with excitement. The final duel was directly linked to the ranking on the Sword Pagoda. At that time, the ranking on the Sword Pagoda would have new changes. Maybe the first place will be Su-yi. Ryugan River and Yunling Feng are very strong, but Su-yi is also stronger. Zhang-Qing said. If it was a month ago, Zhang-Qing would definitely not believe that Su-yi could be compared with disciples like Ryugan River and Yunling Feng. But now he did not think so. With Su-yi's means and ability, he definitely had the strength to compete. Of course, Su-yi had a lot of hope today. Tan Xiao, Wang Fan, Lu Ji, and the others all agreed. They felt that Su-yi had the strength to compete. Zhang-Qing, Lu Ji, and the others had been in the mysterious space all this time. They did not see what Su-yi and Sita Muyang had experienced and done later. Otherwise, they would not only feel that Su-yi had the strength to compete. Su-yi did not say anything. He smiled slightly. Although Su-yi had been reincarnated, he was still a young man in his previous life. Although he was 3 or 4 years younger than those personal disciples in this life, Su-yi had the mentality of his previous life. At this moment, for no reason, he had the heart to compete. Today's grand event was a grand event for young people. At the age where they were full of vigor, Su-yi also began to feel the blood in his body boiling. Brother Su-yi, how confident are you? Su-jiahui looked at Su-yi curiously with her clear eyes. I said that I must take first place. The points you gave me back then will be returned to you 100-fold. Su-yi said with a smile. Back then, he had borrowed Su-jiahui's points to go to the Divine Sword Cliff to comprehend. He had once said that he would repay her 100-fold. You must take first place. Hearing this, Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, and the others felt helpless when they saw the confidence in Su-yi's eyes. Boss Su-yi was really arrogant. Did he really think that abnormal people like Ryugan River and Yinling Feng did not exist? The points you gave me have already exceeded 10,000 times. Su Jiahui said to Su-yi. Back then, Su-yi had only used a few points. Just the sword pattern stones that Su-yi gave her in the end were worth a huge amount of points from the Xinjiang Gate. The points from a dozen sword pattern stones were already more than 100 times or even 1,000 times the points. The most important thing was that what Su-yi gave her in the myriad sword battlefield was not something that could be exchanged with points. Boss Su-yi, with your strength, even if you can't take first place, you will definitely be able to enter the top 10. Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, and the others said. They were afraid that Su-yi would be embarrassed if he did not take first place, so they wanted to give Su-yi a way out first. More than 10 people chatted as they went to the Lingjian Peak. Then, from Zhang Qing and the others, Su-yi also learned the original ranking on the Sword Pagoda. There were many people on the Sword Pagoda, and Su-yi paid attention to the top 10. Qin Feng, ranked 10th in the Sword Pagoda. Zhang Lingyun, ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda. Jiang Shiwen, ranked 8th in the Sword Pagoda. Nan Linran, ranked 7th in the Sword Pagoda. Gong Qi, ranked 6th in the Sword Pagoda. Sakura Asaka, ranked 5th in the Sword Pagoda. Gu Qinyu, ranked 4th in the Sword Pagoda. Oluo, ranked 3rd in the Sword Pagoda. Yin Lingfeng, ranked 2nd in the Sword Pagoda. Ryugan River, ranked 1st in the Sword Pagoda. Su-yi knew a few of these 10 people. He had been in contact with them before, such as Zhang Lingyun, Gong Qi, Sakura Asaka, and Yin Lingfeng. It's Su-yi and Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji. There were flying savage beasts flying around. When the disciples saw Su-yi and the others, their eyes changed, and they started to discuss. They seem to be talking about us. Zhang Qing was a little excited. Once upon a time, she dreamed that one day she would become the focus of attention among the disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. She did not expect that such a day would really come. Chapter 5:24. Sitting on the back of a flying savage beast, they looked down from the top. The strange peaks were spread out in a myriad of postures. Lingjian Peak is just ahead. Zhang Qing opened her mouth, and her expression suddenly became a little nervous. Today, they were not here to watch the duel, but to participate in it. Following the gaze of Zhang Qing and the others, Su-yi also looked forward. Among the peaks, a giant peak was cut in half, as if it had been flattened from the middle. It was connected with the surrounding mountains, forming a vast square. In the distance, most of the peaks of some mountains were swallowed by clouds and mist, leaving only the peaks. Looking from afar, it was like a fairyland. Rumble. On one side of the huge square, there were 2 huge mountains. Between the 2 green mountains, there was a majestic waterfall. A huge stone sword, about 10 zhang tall, rushed out like a waterfall. It was like tens of thousands of roaring demon beasts breaking through the clouds. It directly smashed onto the huge stone sword, stirring up layers of huge waves. It was like tens of thousands of wild horses that had broken free of their reins, creating waves that were several zhang tall on the huge stone sword. Water splashed around, like thousands of white pear flowers blooming. It was very shocking. Screech! The gale golden eagle spread its wings and hovered at the edge of Lingjian Peak. The senior disciples of Shanjian Gate were maintaining order, so the savage beast could not get close. After Su Yi, Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the others landed on the gale golden eagle, the gale golden eagle flapped its wings and flew away, landing on a mountain not far away. At this moment, there were already many savage demon beast mounts resting on top of the densely packed towering trees on the mountaintop. It's the people from the 36th Sword Peak. That's Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the other outer disciples. They got the sword pattern stones this time, and they're ranked in the top 20. It's them. The outer disciples actually got so many sword pattern stones and entered the top 68. They're the same as Su Yi, disciples of the 36th Sword Peak. Su Yi and Situ Muyang snatched so many sword pattern stones and gave them to them. With the appearance of Su Yi, Su Jiahui, and the others, many complicated gazes shot towards them. Some people discussed in low voices. With Su Yi's current reputation, he naturally became the focus of attention the moment he appeared. Is he Su Yi? He doesn't seem that old, and he's quite handsome. In Cool Craftsman Network in the crowd, many female disciples lowered their heads and laughed. Many people had already seen Su Yi, but they had only seen him from afar and had never seen him up close. At this moment, looking at Su Yi, he immediately attracted the attention of many graceful female disciples. In this world where strength was respected, coupled with Su Yi's handsome appearance, he naturally had an irresistible attraction to many of the opposite sex. It was easy to imagine how attractive a young, handsome, and promising young man would be to these female disciples who had just awakened to love. With his keen soul force, Su Yi sensed the gazes around him, but he didn't pay much attention to them. Instead, he looked around. The vast square was unimaginably large. It could probably hold more than 100,000 people. The surrounding auras were fluctuating, and it was obvious that a restriction had been set up. From Su Yi's perspective, he could only see a part of the square. In the center of the square, there was an empty space that had been isolated. There were disciples in armor, standing in an orderly manner, maintaining order. These disciples of the Shinjin Gate all had sharp and solemn auras. At a glance, one could tell that they had gone through a true baptism of blood. Their auras made one's heart tremble for no reason. At that moment, there were dozens of disciples in the empty area. All of them stood straight and gave off an extraordinary aura. Their eyes were slightly closed. At the top of the square, there was a high platform with many seats on it. Fresh fruits and liquids were placed on it, which should be reserved for the elders who came to the scene today. At this moment, the sun was high in the sky. Many disciples had arrived at the Lingjian Peak. There were no less than 40,000 to 50,000 people. The lively and noisy voices were all talking about today's final showdown. The voices converged into a sound wave that went straight to the sky. In such an atmosphere, Su Yi's blood could not help but boil a little more. The square of the Lingjian Peak, which was surrounded by mountains on all sides, was simple and modeled. The huge stone floor covered the entire square and was engraved with mysterious patterns. However, at this moment, the lineup of tens of thousands of people washed away the simple atmosphere and made it lively and noisy. It was full of enthusiasm and expectations. The real showdown today is definitely the showdown between the top 10 disciples of the Sword Pagoda. Some disciples were looking forward to it. The real showdown would be between the top 10 disciples of the Sword Pagoda. Today, they could broaden their horizons. Don't forget that there are some dark horses. Su Yi, Sita Muyang, and Mu Yao. The number of sword pattern stones they obtained is in the top 3. A disciple said, judging from the number of sword pattern stones this time, there were many dark horses. Among them, Su Yi, Situ Muyang, and Mu Yao came out of nowhere and amazed the world. The sword pattern stones don't represent everything. Although the number of sword pattern stones one can get represents one's strength, it can't completely represent one's strength. Otherwise, there would be no need for this showdown. The sword pagoda could be ranked by the number of sword pattern stones. Some disciples were more pertinent. The number of sword pattern stones obtained from the battlefield of 10,000 swords could represent one's strength to some extent. However, there were many reasons for this, and it could not be said to be absolute. I heard that the number of sword pattern stones obtained by senior brother Ryugen River this time was only barely enough to enter the top 68. Therefore, the number of sword pattern stones cannot represent one's true strength. A disciple testified that the flowing Cloud River, which was ranked first in the sword pagoda, had barely made it into the top 68 in terms of sword pattern stones from the myriad sword battlefield. Ryugen River was even the last to leave the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Could it be that Ryugen River's strength was only barely enough? It said that Situ Muyang is the son of the sect leader. Someone mentioned Situ Muyang's identity. This news had already spread in Xinjiang Gate and caused a lot of commotion. No one was surprised that Situ Muyang was so powerful at such a young age. After all, he was the son of the sect leader. At the front of the crowd stood many young disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. They were all between 25 and 30 years old. They were all disciples of the previous batch of disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, but they still stayed in the Xinjiang Gate to cultivate. These disciples were also attracted by such a grand event. They wanted to see how strong this batch of junior brothers and sisters were. That Mu Yao's identity is not simple either. It's said that she is the personal disciple of a grand elder. Her seniority is very high, even higher than the sect leaders, as senior disciples said. Some of the older disciples whispered. They had been in the Divine Sword sect for a long time, so they knew a lot more than this batch of disciples. Chapter 5:25. If Su Yi is also Elder Su's disciple, then his seniority is the same, even higher than the sect leader. That's interesting. There's a lot of noise and excitement everywhere, and all kinds of discussions could be heard. Many disciples even privately opened a gambling house, betting on the ranking of the 68 disciples who would enter the final showdown of the Spirit Sword Peak. The odds were different. Of course, most of the bets were placed on Ryugen River, Yunling Feng, and the others. Su Yi, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others landed on the Gale Golden Eagle and looked around, shocked by the noisy atmosphere. Looking at the original L Chapter G today, their identities were different. Coming to such a place, under the influence of such an atmosphere, they all felt their blood surging. Especially Zhang Qing and the others. They were also one of the protagonists today. They knew that their strength was not enough. But at this moment, under the influence of such an atmosphere, they also had the courage to fight with the best of the direct disciples. Su Yi, we can go to the center first. Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others glanced around, and after the shock in their eyes, they said to Su Yi, they came to participate in the showdown today, so they could go to the center of the square first. In the center of the square, there was an empty square that was separated. Only the 68 disciples who participated in the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Conference could enter. As for the onlookers, they could only watch from the surroundings. Su Yi nodded, and then went to the center of the square with Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the others. As for the other outer disciples, they could only watch from the outside. It's Su Yi and the others. A group of people shuttled through the crowd. In the crowded square, when the disciples saw Su Yi and the others, they immediately made way for Su Yi and the others to pass through without hindrance. However, in the crowd, many eyes were staring at Su Yi with anger. The owners of these angry gazes were all personal disciples and inner disciples. This time, in the Myriad Sword battlefield, practically all the inner court disciples had been plundered by Su Yi. Naturally, their gazes towards Su Yi would not be kind. Su Yi held his head high and puffed out his chest, ignoring the gazes around him. In any case, he had already left the Myriad Sword battlefield, so these fellows could not do anything to him. Passing through the crowd in the square, Su Yi, Su Jiahui, and a few others also arrived at the spacious and isolated square. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the isolated square was actually not small. The square was circular in shape, and there were 16 ancient stone platforms that were arranged in a picturesque manner. Each of them had an area of several hundred feet. As far as the eye could see, there were 16 ancient stone platforms standing in a disorderly manner. It was a shocking sight. At this moment, there were already dozens of young men and women standing in the square. They had extraordinary auras and stood quietly with their eyes slightly closed. Sensing that someone was approaching, some of them opened their eyes slightly to take a look. When they saw that it was Sue-E, their eyes flickered. However, there were even more people who did not waver. Their eyes were still slightly closed as they rested. Sue felt a cold gaze. Looking in the direction of the source of the gaze, he raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw the owner of the gaze. The owner of the gaze was none other than Gong Chi, who was ranked 6th in the Sword Pagoda, with a cold glint in her phoenix eyes, as if she wanted to kill someone with her gaze. Beside Gong Chi was the beautiful Sakura Asaka, who was also glaring fiercely at Sue-E. Later, we will have a duel on this platform. When they arrive at the small square, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others became even more excited and nervous. Later, they would have a duel on these stone platforms. Being able to ascend these stone platforms represented a kind of honor and identity. Sui did not pay attention to Gong Chi and Sakura Asaka. It was better to stay away from these women. Sweeping his gaze across his surroundings, he saw quite a few figures that he had seen in the myriad sword battlefield in this isolated plaza. Then, Sui closed his eyes and began to wait. It seemed that the final duel of the myriad sword conference would take a while. There was no doubt that the atmosphere around the square and Sue-E was at an age where he was full of vigor. Although his mental state was far better than his peers, his blood was boiling in his body. Young people were all somewhat arrogant and unruly. On such an occasion, they should compete to see who was better. If it had to be said that it was a kind of arrogance and rudeness, it was also the frivolity of young people. If one was not frivolous, it would be a waste of youth. Time passed slowly in the bustle. More and more people arrived at the Lingjian Peak, and it became more and more lively. Its senior brother Namli ran. Senior brother Oluo is here too. On the isolated square, there were figures approaching from time to time. They were all disciples who could participate in the final duel of the Myriad Sword Conference. Usually, any one of them was a well-known figure in the Xinjiang Gate. Their appearance at this moment could cause a lot of commotion. Sui closed his eyes. Through his soul power, he felt the aura of these outstanding young people. However, he did not open his eyes and maintained his state. Senior brother Yunling Feng, he's also here. In the crowd, the commotion reached a new height. The appearance of a young man in white caused a stir in the crowd. The male disciples' eyes were full of awe. Many female disciples' eyes rippled and their hearts were moved. The young man in white had a delicate and indifferent face. Under his long eyelashes, his eyes shone brightly. His skin was as white as a woman's, and he had an unusual handsomeness. Yunling Feng is very strong. His future is limitless. In the crowd, there were many older disciples who were discussing. Such a junior brother, even in their batch of disciples, was probably not to be outdone. He felt a cold stare directed at him from the side. He opened his eyes slightly and looked in the direction of the stare. The owner of the gaze was Yunling Feng from the 15th Sword Peak, whom he had met several times before. The grudge between him and the 15th Sword Peak was quite deep. Sui guessed that Yunling Feng wanted to find trouble with him in the Myriad Sword battlefield, because he had dealt with several disciples of the 15th Sword Peak. In the Myriad Sword battlefield, He had not fought with Yunling Feng directly. It was not because he was afraid of him, but because there were too many pro-disciples in the Myriad Sword battlefield. At this moment, He was not worried on the Lingjian Peak. If he encountered Yunling Feng, he could test it out. Yunling Feng walked onto the square, and his gaze only lingered on Sue-E for a short while. He knew that Sue-E had some skills, but he was still not his real opponent today. However, if he met him today, he could take the opportunity to let him know that in the face of absolute strength, all unorthodox methods were useless. Senior brother Ryugen River is here. Suddenly, the crowd became restless again, and a young man appeared in the middle of the square. Chapter 5:26. Su Yi's gaze immediately landed on the youth. His appearance was clear and bright, and his eyes were bright and lively. He gave off a feeling of being bathed in the spring breeze. As if sensing Su Yi's gaze, the youth looked back at Su Yi and actually nodded slightly. Then he stood to the side, as if everything around him had nothing to do with him. Chi-chi. Two cold gazes shot over like swords. Su Yi's eyes immediately moved, and a familiar figure appeared in his vision. Her orange clothes fluttered, and her figure was graceful. However, that gaze was filled with coldness. Who else could it be other than Mu Yao? For pairs of eyes met, and the light in Mu Yao's eyes became even colder. She glared fiercely at Su Yi. Su Yi smiled bitterly to himself. This woman was really like a vengeful spirit. He didn't know why she kept following him. On Mu Yao's body, Su Yi's spiritual perception had always felt an unfathomable feeling. I see that there are quite a few women here who seem to be interested in you. A faint voice with a hint of childishness entered Su Yi's ears. Then, a slightly immature face appeared in front of Su Yi. It was Sita Muyang. Today, Sita Muyang had changed into a tight black robe. His figure was slender, and although he wasn't very old, he emitted a heroic spirit. He had sword-like eyebrows, phoenix-like eyes, a straight nose, and thin lips. His clear gaze didn't seem to contain a trace of distracting thoughts or vulgarity. However, at this moment, his gaze swept over Mu Yao, Sakura, Asaka, and Gongqi. In the end, Situ Muyang's gaze was somewhat sympathetic as he looked at Su Yi. What does a little brat know? Su Yi rolled his eyes at Situ Muyang. I think those women are definitely interested in you. You have to be careful. My father told me that the more beautiful a woman is, the more difficult it is to provoke her, Situ Muyang said, kindly reminding Su Yi. Su Yi raised his eyebrows. From the looks of it, Sect Master Sita Luyin was also someone with a story. Right? Are you really Elder Su's disciple? Sita Muyang suddenly asked Su Yi. Su Yi's expression did not change. He was indeed not Elder Su's disciple, but this little guy was after all the son of the sect leader. If he said that he was not Elder Su's disciple and the news spread out, he was afraid that there would be some trouble. Boss Su Yi is of course Elder Su's disciple. Zhang Qing secretly gritted his teeth and said, the fact that Su Yi was not Elder Su's disciple could not be spread out. Yes, Boss Su Yi is of course Elder Su's disciple. Lu Ji and the others saw that Zhang Qing had also said this, and immediately nodded in agreement. So you really are Grand Teacher's disciple. Hearing this, Sita Muyang raised his eyebrows. He looked at Su Yi with an expression of helplessness. Immediately, he was not particularly willing, but he straightforwardly bowed and said, Greetings, young Marshal Granduncle. Young Marshal Granduncle. Su Yi was somewhat astonished. You are my Grand Teacher's disciple. According to seniority, you are naturally my Marshal Granduncle. But you're not much older than me, so it is better to call you young Marshal Granduncle. Sita Muyang was somewhat aggrieved. Originally, he wanted to fight with this guy after coming out, who knew that this guy was actually Grand Teacher's disciple and his own Marshal Granduncle. He was only a few years older than him, but he was 2 generations older than him. This was too much of a loss. Brother Su Yi, Elder Su's identity is somewhat special. He is the Marshal Granduncle of the sect leader. So, looking at the astonished look on Su Yi's face, Su Jiahui explained. Although Elder Su was in the 36th Sword Peak, his seniority in the Shunjian Gate was not ordinary. Even if the sect leader saw him, he had to call him Marshal Granduncle. Is that so? Su Yi suddenly understood. No wonder when he first came to Lingjian Peak, those elders' faces changed when they heard that he was Elder Su's disciple. 3 days ago, on Lingjian Peak, when they saw Elder Su appear, the elders were in awe. It turned out that Elder Su's seniority in the Shunjian Gate was so high that he was the Marshal Granduncle of the sect leader. Hey, you don't have to salute me in the future. Su-yi smiled at Sitamuyang. He was a little guilty. After all, he was not Elder Su's disciple, but this little guy was the son of the sect leader. This seniority still needs to be calculated clearly. You have to respect your teacher. Sitamuyang looked very serious. He looked up at Su-yi and stretched out a hand in front of Su-yi. What are you doing? Su-yi asked doubtfully. What do you think? I saluted you and called you Martial Granduncle. You can't let me suffer a loss. Sitamuyang rolled his eyes at Su-yi. Su-yi, young sect leader, seems to want to change the salute. Zhang Qing raised the corner of his mouth and reminded Su-yi. Change the salute. Looking at Sitamuyang's outstretched hand and looking at his eyes that seemed to be free of distracting thoughts, Su-yi's eyes could not help but twitch. What martial granduncle? This little guy clearly wanted to take advantage of him. I'll change the salute later. Helplessly rolling his eyes at Sitamuyang, Su-yi knew that he was being taken advantage of, but there was nothing he could do. That's fine, but I'm afraid the salute is too light and will not match your status. Sitamuyang smiled in satisfaction and withdrew his hand. He knew that all of Su-yi's good things were hidden in that strange space. It was indeed inconvenient here. The corner of Su-yi's eyes twitched. He had to take first place in this myriad sword conference. He could not make a loss. Martial Granduncle, it seems that someone is looking for you. Sitamuyang suddenly raised his eyebrows and looked to the front. Two beautiful figures were walking over. Su-yi looked over. The two beautiful figures were Sakura, Asaka, and Gongqi. Seeing the two women approaching, Su-yi was a little surprised. Could it be that these two women were looking for trouble again? Sakura, Asaka, and Gongqi. Although the two women had different temperaments and appearances, their temperament and beauty were enough to make many young talents scramble for them. Sway hashtag, however, with the two women's eyesight and arrogance, there were not many young people in the entire Xinjiang Gate that could catch their attention, let alone anyone who could get close to them. At this moment, the two women, who were equally beautiful, were walking towards Su-yi, instantly attracting the attention of many people. Under the attention of many people, the two women walked straight to Su-yi's side. The coldness in Gongqi's phoenix eyes did not lessen, but at this moment, she seemed to be trying hard to suppress herself. Su-yi, how about we make a deal with you? Looking at Su-yi, Sakura Asaka said with a smile on her face, her eyes sparkling. Su-yi was surprised. He nodded slightly and said, What deal? Chapter 5:27. In the hearts of the two women, 20 high-grade star-grade elixirs were not enough to make Su-yi suffer a loss. After all, the mystical spiritual fruit belonged to the myriad sword battlefield and did not belong to this guy. I'm sorry, I don't have the mystical spiritual fruit. Su-yi directly rejected the offer. Although 20 high-grade star-grade elixirs were not cheap, a treasure like the mystical spiritual fruit was priceless. No one would be willing to exchange one mystical spiritual fruit for 10 high-grade star-grade elixirs. Moreover, the mystical spiritual fruit's medicinal efficacy had greatly increased in the mysterious space. Su-yi rejected the offer without hesitation. How could he possibly exchange the mystical spiritual fruit? Moreover, if he really gave it to the two women, it would definitely be more troublesome. Su-yi, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Gongqi had been suppressing the anger in her heart. At this moment, when she heard Su-yi's words, she immediately glared at him and scolded him. This brat was really too much. I know you like me, but I really don't have the mystical spiritual fruit. Su-yi was not someone who could be intimidated. Even more so, he did not like being threatened. Not women, not even beautiful women. In terms of beauty, he had met many women who were slightly more beautiful than Gongqi and Sakura Asaka. Chapter 5:28. You don't have to be so polite. Sitaluyan waved his long sleeves and sat down on a large chair behind him. His deep eyes flickered with a light. He unconsciously revealed a natural domineering aura of someone in a superior position. When one looked at him, they would unknowingly feel pressured. A group of elders also sat in the front row, and the accompanying protectors sat in the back row. Everyone stood up, and their eyes looked up at the figure on the high platform. They were in awe and moved, and their eyes were blazing. Only in such a grand event like today would the sect master and the elders appear together. Suyi's gaze also fell on the seats on the high platform, and finally his eyes fell on the left and right sides of the sect master, Sita Luyan. There were two old men sitting there, and it was the first time that Su Yi had seen them. In the 2 times in the main hall of the Tianjian Peak, Su Yi had seen many elders, but he had never seen these two. To be able to sit on both sides of the sect master, it was enough to show that the status of these two old men should not be low. The old man on the left appeared to be very old. He had a head full of silver hair and was wearing a plain robe. His body was so skinny that the plain robe on his body swayed like a skirt. However, his face was extremely red, and his pair of black eyes emitted a deep light that was bright and full of spirit. The old man on the right had thick black hair, and his beard and eyebrows were a little white. Sitting on the chair, his thin body was thinner than the old man on the left of Sita Luyan, but his eyes were deep like a black hole, making people unable to see the bottom. Very strong. Su Yi looked at these two old men from a distance, and under his invisible perception, he also felt that they were incomparably powerful. Dong. As the sect master and the elders took their seats on the high platform, an ancient bronze bell made a melodious bell sound, which resounded throughout the Lingjian Peak and echoed in all directions. The whispers and noises in the surroundings also suddenly fell silent under the melodious sound of the bell. Gazes from all directions were cast on the high platform. Following the sound of the bell, the skinny old man dressed in plain robes on Sita Luyan's left slowly stood up. His body seemed to be a bit unsteady, as if he could fall at any moment. However, none of the elders and protectors beside him believed that this old man would really fall. He is the second elder of Shunjian Gate, Zhongsun Luan. To my father's right is the third elder, Wu Chuyang. They usually don't show their faces. Sita Luyan approached Su Yi and whispered. The two elders were not simple. They were the second elder and the third elder of Shunjian Gate. Their status was above many elders, and they would only come out for grand occasions like today. Second elder, third elder. So he was not surprised. No wonder they could sit on both sides of the sect leader. Naturally, their identities were extraordinary. Second elder Zhongsun Luhan stood up and walked to the front of the stage. His gaze swept all around and included all the disciples in his line of sight. At this moment, all the disciples raised their heads and looked at the second elder in awe. It's a pleasure to meet the younger generation of Shunjian Gate. You are the future and hope of Shunjian Gate. The second elder's voice was deep. Although it was not loud, it resounded around the square and was enough for everyone to hear clearly. A short sentence, but it made the blood of all the disciples boil for no reason. It had the power to affect people's hearts. With his eyes shining, the second elder looked at the disciples around, and his deep voice continued, "Now, I announce that the final battle of the Myriad Sword Conference begins now." His voice reverberated, resounding throughout Lingjian Peak and reverberating throughout Shunjian Gate. Boom! When the last word of the second elder fell, the cheers of the crowd boiled, and the sound waves went straight to the sky. GC listening to the sound waves that went straight to the sky and looking at the cheering disciples, all the elders and protectors secretly smiled. No matter from which aspect, this generation of young disciples was indeed extraordinary. The second elder was also very satisfied. Looking at the boiling crowd, he paused for a few breaths and then continued to speak with a smile in his eyes. The rules of the final battle are the same as in previous years. 68 disciples who have obtained the quota will fight for the battle stage until there is only one master on each of the 16 battle stages. Then, the 16 battle stages will be combined, and the remaining 16 people will have to rely on luck to face their opponents, until the final winner is the champion. The champion of this Myriad Sword Conference will also receive the supreme benefits and rewards of Shunjian Gate. Supreme benefits and rewards. Boom! The entire place was filled with excitement as their gazes burned with passion. The divine sword sect's boundless benefits and rewards were irresistible to everyone present. However, most of them were not qualified to compete. While they were envious, they were also quite satisfied to be able to witness the birth of the champion of today's Myriad Sword Conference. Supreme benefits and rewards. Su Yi's eyes moved. Supreme benefits and rewards were one of the main reasons for participating in this Myriad Sword Conference. Looking at the boiling crowd, the second elder continued to speak with a smile in his voice. Of course, the 16 disciples who can stand on the battle stage in the end will also have their own rewards. The ranking will be based on the time of defeat. The higher the ranking, the higher the reward. However, the disciples who participate in the final battle must pay attention. It is forbidden to deliberately kill during the battle. Those who admit defeat or fall off the battle stage will be considered as the loser, and the winner will not be allowed to continue to attack. Those who violate the rules will be disqualified and punished severely. Those who violate the rules will be crippled of their cultivation and expelled from the sect. Remember this. When the second elder's voice fell, his thin body also swayed back and forth, as if he was about to fall down and sit back down. Now, the 68 disciples who have obtained the quota can prepare. When the bell rings again, you can go on the stage to battle. Understood? Protector Ho Changming had unknowingly walked to the front of the stage. His voice was mixed with Yuan Qi, and it was also clear in the noisy crowd. It was enough for all the disciples present to hear him clearly. This kind of strength was enough to prove that he was not ordinary. Understood? In the inner field, the disciples who participated in the final battle nodded in response, their voices sonorous and powerful. If that's the case, then get ready. Ho Changming opened his mouth with a smile on his face. Recently, he was in a good mood and seemed to be very happy. His originally serious face was full of smiles recently. Dong! The sound of the bell once again resounded throughout the Lingjian Peak and reverberated throughout the Xinjian Gate. Start now. When the bell rang, Protector Ho Changming waved his hand and suddenly fell. A sound mixed with Yuan Qi also resounded like thunder. Boom! At this moment, on the inner field, dozens of auras were released together, and the light of Yuan Qi was like a flame. Dozens of figures leaped out and landed on the 16 huge, ancient stone platforms that were arranged in picturesque disorder in the inner field. Chapter 529. Swoosh, swoosh. In the inner field, one figure after another leaped onto the quaint stone platform, their auras bursting out. They were all wrapped in Yuan Qi light, afraid that someone would beat them to it. There were only 16 stone platforms out of 68 people. The competition was fierce. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Lu Ji, Tan Chao, and Wang Fan knew their strength. They were afraid that they wouldn't be able to fight to the end, but they had to at least get onto the battle platform. When they thought about it, they would remember that they had fought with the best of the best among the direct disciples. Some people quickly got onto the battle platform, but there were also some who were indifferent and were secretly watching. Yin Lingfeng, Gu Chanyu, Gong Qi, Mu Yao, Nin Liran, and the others who had been ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda rankings didn't seem to be in a hurry. They were secretly observing. Swoosh, swoosh. However, very quickly, the remaining figures also leaped up one after another and ascended the stage. Those who had been ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda rankings deliberately avoided standing on the same battle platform. When two strong contenders fought, one was bound to lose. Their goal was to at least get into the top 16. Even if they were confident in winning, they didn't want to encounter too strong an opponent and consume too much of their energy. The closer they got to the end, the stronger their opponent would be. If they consumed too much energy at the beginning, they wouldn't be able to support themselves at the end. Bang! Bang! On the 16 battle platforms, as the disciples who were ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda rankings got onto the battle platform, the others tacitly began to join forces to attack the disciples who were ranked at the top. But this kind of joint attack was definitely not 100% successful. Once there was a chance, everyone would attack without hesitation. After all, this was related to the ranking. The atmosphere on the battle platforms was already tense. As someone attacked, it was as if a series of bombs had been detonated. Suddenly, all the battle platforms were filled with surging yuan qi. The battle was on the verge of breaking out. "Kid, you don't deserve to be here." On the battle platform, not far away, a direct disciple shouted softly. His figure flashed like lightning and directly appeared in front of Zhang Qing. The direct disciple clenched his fist tightly, and the fist in his hand had already arrived in front of Zhang Qing. The faint black earth attribute yuan qi caused the surrounding space to tremble, and a whistling sound could be heard in the air. Zhang Qing unsheathed his sword at this speed, but he didn't even have the chance to attack. He hurriedly retreated in a panic, reducing some of the force. However, his chest was also hit by a punch. His body was immediately sent flying out of the arena. Bang, bang, bang. Almost at the same time, Tan Xiao, Lu Ji, and Wang Fan were also attacked by their opponents and thrown off the stage. Several people were smashed into the inner area one after another, spitting out blood. They were not a match for him at all. Those disciples who were able to obtain a spot were at least at the 3rd or 4th level of the Origin Spirit stage. Although Tan Xiao, Zhang Qing, and the others had made astonishing breakthroughs in the past month, their bodies had been tempered and transformed from the inside out. However, in such a short period of time, they were still far from being able to compare with these direct disciples. Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, Wang Fan, and the others were too weak. The direct disciples on the arena could not be bothered to team up with Zhang Qing and the others. They also disdained to work together to deal with their opponents, and were even more embarrassed to be on the same stage as them. The moment they attacked, they swept Zhang Qing and the others off the stage. Seeing Zhang Qing being swept off the arena, Ho Changming was not surprised. It was fine as long as there were no major injuries. He also knew that with Zhang Qing's cultivation and strength, it was still insufficient for him to contend with the elites among the direct disciples. Qila, on the arena not far away, Su Jiahui was also attacked. A woman was attacking Su Jiahui. Her jet black hair fluttered behind her head, and her footwork was unpredictable. Her slender hand held a sword, but she disdained to attack Su Jiahui. Her left slender palm struck out. Z update V new/best hashtag G quick hashtag unspecified currency. Su Jiahui's beautiful face changed. With her cultivation and strength, she was unable to contend against the woman and quickly retreated. "You're just an outer disciple. You're not worthy to fight with us," the woman said indifferently. Her speed disappeared, and with a shake of her slender hand, her 5 fingers clenched into a fist. Her fist was wrapped in blazing fire attribute yuan qi, as if it was emitting flames, causing her fist to be dyed a scarlet red. With a swift and fierce momentum, she chased after Su Jiahui once again. Su Jiahui dodged the punch to her chest, but the punch landed on her shoulder. PFFF. Under the impact of a blazing force, Su Jiahui spat out blood from her red lips, and her delicate body was sent flying off the arena. Chapter 530. Bang! A blazing aura surged like a tidal wave as the fist landed solidly on the woman's body like a bolt of lightning. Sui did not hold back when he attacked. This woman did not hold back when she attacked Su Jiahui as well, causing Su Yi to be secretly furious. Puffed. Shock filled the woman's eyes as she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her delicate body flew out like a kite with a broken string, heavily smashing onto the stage. Only at this moment did the woman understand how terrifying this youth was. He was much more terrifying than the rumors. She could not even withstand a single blow from him. Furthermore, she could feel that it was because she had attacked Su Jiahui that this youth was enraged. That's Wang Yating, ranked 29th in the Sword Pagoda. She was actually struck down from the stage with a single blow. Su Yi really doesn't know how to be gentle with a woman. Many of the spectating disciples were speechless. Su Yi actually did not know how to be gentle with a woman. On the high platform, the elders, protectors, and sect master Sido Luyun had also witnessed this scene. Their gazes were all secretly moved. A fifth-level origin spirit stage practitioner was actually unable to withstand a single blow from Su Yi. With their eyesight, how could they not know what this meant? Furthermore, many of the experts present were secretly paying attention to Su Yi because of what happened a month ago on the Heaven's Ascension platform. A fifth-level origin spirit stage personal disciple was struck down from the stage with a single blow and in such a casual manner. This kind of impact was even greater for the elders and protectors present. He's Elder Su's disciple, Su Yi. On the high platform, the second elder's gaze landed on Su Yi's stage as he asked Sita Luyun in a low voice. "That's right, it's that youth." Sita Luyun replied in a low voice as a light flickered in her eyes. To be able to reach such a level at such a young age is already rare. Perhaps this is the fortune of our Xinjian gate. The third elder, Wu Chuyang, spoke. His deep and dark eyes flickered with extraordinary splendor. After Su Yi shot Wang Yuting down from the dueling platform, the three youths on the dueling platform were on the verge of erupting. The gazes of the three youths, who had just been engaged in a heated battle, immediately fell onto Su Yi's body. Sword cries rang out from the three swords, as the auras of the peak fourth-level Essence Spirit stage were not held back at all. The expressions of the three young men turned serious. Wang Yuting's strength was obviously stronger than theirs, but she couldn't even withstand a single blow from Su Yi. Su Yi's strength was really as strong as the rumors said. They had heard of Su Yi's reputation. Originally, like many others, they had doubts in their hearts. Perhaps in the myriad sword battlefield, Su Yi and Sita Muyang had relied on their sneak attacks and the ability to control the savage beast to be able to run amok. It might not have been their own strength. Only at this moment did they realize that the Su Yi before them was absolutely as strong as the rumors said. The six pairs of eyes looked at each other, as if they had formed some kind of tacit understanding. Swish, swish, swish. As the three figures leapt forward, Yuan Qi gushed out from the soles of their feet. Yuan Qi was released, and rays of light erupted. The phantoms of two ferocious beasts and one flying beast instantly formed under the feet of the three youths. Awoo! The roars of beasts were like thunder. The Yuan Qi under the feet of the three youths transformed, causing their might to soar. With tacit understanding, the three youths rushed towards Su Yi from three different directions. At the same time, sword auras shot out from each of their hands. Sword auras were resplendent and sharp, as various Yuan Qi rays intertwined, creating a formidable might. Su Yi raised his eyes slightly. Hand seals formed in his hands, as Yuan Qi gushed out from his wide meridians. Scarlet light shone from his body, before finally enveloping his entire body, forming a Yuan Qi halo that enveloped his entire body. It was as if he was enveloped in a resplendent sun, releasing a blazing aura. Boom! At this moment, with Su Yi as the center, the surrounding void trembled for no reason. It was as if an inexplicable force had appeared that could affect the surrounding space. Bang, bang, bang. Swish, swish, swish. Three phantoms of beasts and three sword auras, from three different directions, landed on Su Yi's Yuan Qi halo. In an instant, there was a muffled sound as a gust of wind whistled out. The Yuan Qi halo around Su Yi's body only trembled a few times, and several places that were struck by the impact were dented, but that was all. Immediately, Su Yi made his move. He took a step forward, as his hair danced and his blue robe flapped. With an incomparably swift momentum, he took a step forward. He directly appeared in front of one of the youths. His fist had already been formed, and he directly blasted it out. A great momentum surged out, causing fear to appear in the eyes of the ferocious beast shadow under the youth's feet. Rumble, like a hot knife through butter, the surrounding void also trembled. The ferocious beast shadow under the youth's feet directly shattered layer by layer. Under the impact of the tremendous force, the youth's mouth was overflowing with blood, and his body also staggered back. The remaining two youths were originally in shock, but they were not weak. When they recovered from their shock, they immediately rushed to reinforce the youth. 63. The Yuan Shi, transformed into a brute demon beast under one of the youth's feet, roared ferociously. Its sharp claws pounced out, and the sword in its hand was like a rainbow. The sword aura exploded as it directly slashed toward Su Yi. The other youth's ferocious beast shadow under his feet swooped down. It flapped its wings, bringing with it a strong gust of wind. The sword in its hand also slashed out fiercely. Swish! An astonishing scene appeared. Su Yi came to the side of the youth who had just staggered back. He stretched out his hand and directly clasped the youth's shoulder in his palm. Under the tremendous force, he forcibly suppressed the youth. Then, he forcefully flung the youth like a javelin towards the youth who had transformed his Yuan Qi into a ferocious brute demon beast. At the same time, Yuan Qi swept out from the soles of Su Yi's feet. Facing the youth on the back of the ferocious beast that was swooping down, he did not retreat. Instead, he moved one of his hands, and blazing Yuan Qi of the fire attribute burst out. A terrifying aura burst out from his fist, and a violent force exploded in the void in front of him. Rumble. In an instant, a blazing and ferocious force exploded in the vacuum. The force on Su Yi's fist was visible to the naked eye, like layers of fiery shadows, rushing out with an earth-shattering force, shattering the space ripples. The blazing fire wave swept out like a shock wave, directly blocking the youth's attack. At the same time, it also scattered the ferocious beast and the sword aura. The youth's expression changed greatly. His face instantly turned pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. He directly fell down. Bang! Su Yi's figure appeared, and another punch was thrown out. With a muffled sound, the impact of Yuan Qi blasted the youth off the stage. Not far away, the youth who was riding the ferocious brute demon beast shadow was shocked by Su Yi's attack. He had no choice but to withdraw his sword aura. Chapter 531. Puff. The former spat out a mouthful of blood as his body flew backward. This young disciple was unlucky. He could only watch as he crashed into the beast's shadow, unable to avoid it, and suffered a heavy blow. The ferocious beast shadow was also smashed into pieces. The young man fell and staggered. Chila. A ray of red light swept out. Su Yi's figure appeared with a series of afterimages. His 5 fingers curled into a claw that flickered with red light and landed directly on the young man's shoulder. A fierce and domineering aura erupted from his body. His black hair danced in the wind, and the sound of bones breaking could be faintly heard from the young man's shoulder. Get down, Su Yi roared. He waved his hand, and a red Yuan Qi radiance erupted. It swept out in all directions, and the young man was sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was thrown off the stage. There was only one last young man left on the stage. He had just been sent flying and spat out a mouthful of blood. The sword in his hand had already fallen to the side. As he struggled to get up, he saw Su Yi walking towards him. His heart trembled for no reason. This personal disciple knew that he was no match for Su Yi. He subconsciously retreated in fear, and his face was already as pale as ash. The Yuan Qi on Su Yi's body surged. He looked at the last young man on the stage. His hair danced in the wind, and his red eyes were like lightning. He took 3 steps forward and stood on the stage. It seemed that he did not intend to pay any attention to the young man. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Su Yi's stage, and they were all in shock. These personal disciples were all elites among this batch of disciples. Every one of them had exceptional talent and potential. However, in front of Su Yi, these elite personal disciples were unable to withstand a single blow and were defeated. Many of the spectating personal disciples were shocked. Originally, many people thought that the rumors about Su Yi being able to defeat Zhang Lingyun and the others in the Myriad Sword battlefield were probably exaggerated. Or perhaps it was because of the help of the barbaric beasts in the Myriad Sword battlefield that Su Yi was able to do as he pleased. However, now that they saw it with their own eyes, they finally understood that Su Yi was indeed as terrifying as the rumors said. A 15 or 16-year-old youth who had just arrived at the Divine Sword sect was already so ridiculously powerful. If a few more years passed and he reached the same age as them, how powerful would he be? The elders, protectors, and the others on the high platform were not calm either. This guy is really fierce. Elder Shangwan, who whispered in shock, I missed it, I really missed it. Beside Elder Shangwan, who, a sage-like old man, kept shaking his head. His figure was thin, and his white beard fluttered in the wind. His kind and serious gaze seemed to be regretting something at this moment. This elder was Elder Ing Dang, whom Su Yi had met in the Sword Hall. He had interacted with Su Yi before and had a deep impression of him. However, at that time, Elder Ing Dang did not pay much attention to Su Yi and did not see his potential. In addition, he left the Divine Sword sect for a period of time and only heard about Su Yi after returning. Now that he had seen Su Yi's performance with his own eyes, Elder Shangwan, who was filled with regret. If only he had accepted this kid as his disciple in the training hall. Is this kid really Elder Su's disciple? Elder Ing Dang was unwilling to give up. He whispered to Elder Shangwan, who beside him. It should be known that Elder Su had never accepted a disciple all these years. It shouldn't be fake. Shangwan, who smiled bitterly. He knew what Elder Shangwan, who was thinking. He also wanted to accept this kid as his disciple. However, Elder Su had personally gone to pick him up a few days ago. He was afraid that it would not be fake. Sigh. Elder Shangwan, who sighed. Looking at Su Yi's potential, perhaps Elder Su, who had never accepted a disciple, also wanted to accept him. Bang, bang, bang. The battles on the 4 stages were equally fierce. In the end, only 16 of the 68 disciples could remain on the 16 stages. Only one person could remain on each stage. Everyone was an opponent. Those who were slightly weaker would cooperate with each other to attack the strongest, but this cooperation was not absolute. Nan Linen, ranked 7th in the Sword Pagoda. Her light purple robe fluttered in the wind. Her eyes were dazzling. The sword in her hand let out a sonorous sword cry. Step by step, her aura surged. She fought with the last 2 opponents, but she was not at a disadvantage. On Gu Chinyo's sharp eyebrows, his eyes flickered with a scarlet color, as if flames were flickering. The sword in his hand released a resplendent light that swept in all directions. The sword light was like wind and thunder, as if a scarlet fire wave was surging, setting off waves. This terrifying aura made the opponents tremble. They all retreated, not daring to resist. Sakura Asaka, Gongqi, Oluo, Qin Fong, and other peak direct disciples had a tacit understanding. They did not seize a stage. Their aura erupted. The Yuan Qi light was as bright as the sun. The sword light was like a tide, fiercely colliding with the opponent. The sound was ear-splitting. Not bad. Looking at the fierce battles on each stage, the elders and protectors on the high platform felt gratified. This batch of disciples was not bad. This was the Shunjian Gate's fortune. There were only 2 people on the battle stage where Sita Muyang was. However, Sita Muyang encountered an opponent, a 5th-level Origin Spirit Realm practitioner, ranked 13th in the Sword Pagoda. Sita Liuyun's gaze also fell on Sita Muyang's stage. She was secretly nervous. Fight! The former sword light was swift and fierce, his aura vigorous and continuous. Sita Muyang was not afraid. He dodged the attack. The Wind Rider battle armor on his body flapped his wings. His aura was ancient, causing an indescribable force to appear in the surroundings. The wind whistled, and pressure filled the air. Under the Wind Rider battle armor, Sita Muyang's aura rose by quite a bit. Under his powerful aura, the void trembled as he dove towards his opponent. As Sita Muyang's opponent, the youth's gaze was grave. Who would have thought that such a youth would be so powerful? He originally thought that Sita Muyang was still wet behind the ears. Seeing that he was the sect master's son, it would be fine as long as he defeated him. But now, the youth knew that he had been thinking too much. Sita Muyang's strength had reached such a terrifying level. Although Sita Muyang was clearly a level higher than his opponent, he still could not gain the slightest advantage when fighting with his full strength. Nice, let's continue. Situ Muyong's battle intent rose. His thin lips parted, revealing his white teeth. A battle-thirsty smile hung on his lips. Under the Wind Rider battle armor, his speed soared. Taking advantage of his speed and low altitude, he dove down. His body was like an eagle hunting for its prey. Wung, the Wind Rider battle armor's wings spread out. Like countless blades, the cold light was intimidating. It was as fast as lightning, and the wind whistled. Swish! Swish! The latter did not hesitate. Yuan Qi enveloped him in a ring of light. The Yuan Qi in his body surged, and the sword light was like a tide. He was already going all out. Clang! 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 Sparks flew, and a fierce wind swept out. The light was dazzling. Is this little guy so abnormal? Chapter 532. A smile appeared in Situ Muyong's eyes. He could see that Situ Muyong's strength was more tyrannical than he had imagined. Under such an attack, his opponent would not be able to hold on for long. On the battle stage where Su Yi was, the last young man had blood dripping from the corner of his mouth and was in a sorry state. He picked up the fallen sword and stabbed it into the ground to support his body. The young man looked at Su Yi with a look of horror in his eyes. He did not want to leave the battle stage, but he did not dare to make a move, nor did he have the strength to. Whoosh, below the battle stage, a figure rose into the air and stopped at a low altitude for a moment. Then, the figure landed lightly in front of Su Yi. It was a young man in his 20s. Black tights decorated his muscular and well-proportioned body. A gray cloak fluttered in the wind. His facial features were distinct and his expression was cold. Looking at the young man in front of him, Su Yi raised his eyes slightly and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This young man was none other than Sword 11. I said that I hope to have a chance to really fight at the Myriad Sword Conference. I'm glad that you've come this far. I don't have any regrets. Looking at Su Yi, Sword 11's eyes flickered. His faint voice came out of his mouth, still as cold as ever. You should go to the other battle stages. Maybe you can enter the next round. I'm afraid there's no hope here. Looking at Sword 11 in front of him, Su Yi did not hold back. Sword 11 had not gone to the battle stage just now because he was looking for him. And Su Yi knew Sword 11's strength. Although Sword 11 had lost last time, he seemed to have other trump cards. At this moment, sensing the aura emanating from Sword 11, Su Yi guessed that this guy had also improved in the Myriad Sword battlefield. Last time, I didn't use my full strength. Sword 11 stared at Su Yi. At the same time, he waved his hand and a 3-foot-long treasured sword appeared in his hand. It was still a dazzling black treasured sword, filled with ancient runes. It emitted a faint light that emitted an oppressive pressure. Buzz! The body of the sword trembled slightly, and the earth element energy in 11th sword's body fluctuated slightly. Suddenly, the sword emitted the sound of wind and thunder, as if it was alive. A mighty pressure spread out, faintly causing the surrounding void to tremble. If that's the case, then let's fight. I defeated you last time, and I'll defeat you again this time. Su Yi's expression didn't change much. Last time, he hadn't used his full strength either. And this time, in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, the 11th sword had obtained opportunities and made progress, and he had also obtained good fortune. 11th sword and Su Yi seemed to have already fought last time. Following the confrontation between Jian 11 and Su Yi, many people's gazes were immediately drawn over. The gazes of the elders and protectors on the high platform were also attracted. It was obvious that those disciples just now were far from being enough when compared to 11th sword. This time, I won't give you another chance. Draw your sword. 11th sword stared at Su Yi. The sword in his hand began to emit a black light. The ancient runes on the body of the sword seemed to be flowing, revealing a mysterious mystery. The sword light it emitted cut through the air, causing the surrounding air to fluctuate. The last time he was defeated by Su Yi, it was already a knot in 11th sword's heart. If this knot is not untied, it will become a psychological problem. Feeling the qi on 11th sword's body, Su Yi's gaze moved slightly. He then smiled faintly and said, "Last time you were defeated by my sword. This time, you won't need to use your sword." As his voice trailed off, he pulled out a large blade from behind his back. It was out of its scabbard and immediately appeared in his hand. The large blade emitted a light. It was not ordinary, but compared to the sword in 11th Sword's hand, it was obviously not on the same level. But when Sui pulled out his blade, many people's gazes suddenly twitched. This is Shunjian Gate. Sui draws his blade to face 11th Sword. Is he looking down on 11th Sword? Shunjian Gate respects the sword, but Sui draws his blade. Is he looking down on the swordsmanship of Shunjian Gate? Someone whispered. This was Shunjian Gate. Facing 11th Sword, Sui drew his blade out of its scabbard. Was he looking down on 11th Sword or on the swordsmanship of Shunjian Gate? Okay. 11th Sword's gaze was slightly stunned. This was disdain for him. As his voice trailed off, the eyes on his face were deep. A black light flashed in his pupils. The chi on his body completely changed. A sharp and heavy chi power filled the air. One man and one sword stood there, as if they were unshakable. 11th Sword, you are going all out this time. 11th Sword, you were careless and lost last time. That was an accident. This time, you won't let Sui take advantage of you. Come on, 11th Sword. Defeat that arrogant guy. Amidst the heated discussion, someone shouted loudly. After all, among the personal disciples and inner disciples present, there were few who did not hate Sui. They could no longer take revenge. At this moment, they could only pin their hopes on 11th Sword. Although Sui is arrogant, after all, Zhang Lingyun, who ranks 9th, has also been defeated. Although he was defeated by Sui and Sita Muyang together, Sui is really strong. It is still unknown who will win. Some disciples whispered, but they did not dare to arouse public anger, so their voices were very low. The eyes of the protector elders on the high platform, and even the head of the sect, Sita Luyun, fell on Sui and 11th Sword at this moment. They were all very interested. The sword in 11th Sword's hand hummed as he stared closely at Sui. A surge of battle intent seeped out from his deep eyes, covering his pupils as black light flickered. He was 11th Sword. His previous defeat had already become a knot in his heart. If he was unable to defeat the young man in front of him this time, it would become an obstacle in his cultivation path. It would become a thorn in his heart. He had to win this battle. He had to untie the knot in his heart. Fight! In the next moment, a shout came from 11th Sword's mouth. Sword light erupted from the sword in his hand. Yuan Qi swept out from the soles of his feet. His figure leapt up, sword light flickered. At the same time, an aura of the 5th level of Origin Spirit stage was completely released from 11th Sword's body. It was even close to the later stages of the 5th level of Origin Spirit stage. It swept out with a bang. Not bad. BC chapter # original version. Section F equals sensing the aura on 11th Sword's body. Many of the elders and protectors on the high platform secretly praised him. A disciple like this had outstanding talent and a boundless future ahead of him. Whoosh whoosh, as 11th Sword's figure shot out. His figure was almost like a blurry shadow. He swept from a low altitude, the sword in his hand vibrating at the same time. In an instant, the streaks of sword light turned into streaks of blurry light and shadows. An incomparably sharp aura cut through the air, causing the air to ripple like water, emitting whooshing sounds of wind being torn apart. Chapter 533. Streaks of sharp sword chi spread out, sweeping in all directions, causing the eyes of many people present to tremble. 11th Sword's intelligence has reached such a level. Some elders and protectors were secretly shocked. The 11th Sword's sword was extraordinary. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others who had already retreated below the battle stage looked up at Sui on the battle stage with a serious expression. Below the battle stage, they could feel the incomparable sharpness of the sword light. The sword light shrouded, and the aura was fierce. But at this moment, Sui activated the sword technique in his hand and the yuan qi in his body surged, and finally gathered on the big sword. Buzz! In an instant, the big sword in Su Yi's hand seemed to resonate with the faint sound of a dragon's roar and a dazzling sword light, with an incomparably fierce posture, directly slashed forward. Boom! Ding ding dong dong. In an instant, a terrifying aura erupted, and there was a muffled sound like thunder. Along with the sound of ding ding dong dong, the sound of metal clanging, the strong wind waves collided, and the strong wind swept in all directions, causing people who looked from afar to tremble. Ding ding! The strong wind swept in, and Su Yi staggered back 3 steps. Wherever his feet passed, the ground trembled slightly, but it was incomparably solid. Chila, on the stage UB1, but 11th sword was not like this. His body rubbed against the ground and was shaken back several feet, and the body on his face was immediately replaced by a kind of shock. It's my turn. Su Yi was already prepared. When he stabilized his body on the 3rd step, he stomped his foot, and yuan qi swept out from the soles of his feet. His body was like a series of afterimages as he rushed out. Violent dragon whirlwind strike. Yuan qi surged in the meridians and gathered on the blade. At the same time, Su Yi's second move, the violent dragon whirlwind strike, was directly slashed out. The sword light rotated like an electric arc, like a crescent moon across the void. The terrifying pressure was fierce and violent, like a violent dragon dancing. The light was bright, and the sound of the sword was ear-piercing, causing people's souls to tremble. This scene caused everyone's expression to change. The one whose expression changed the most was GN11. The sharp power of that blade made him feel uneasy. But very quickly, Sword 11's gaze darkened. The speed and power of that blade made it impossible for him to dodge. Yuan qi was infused into the sword, and a complicated sword spell was cast. The sword hummed, and the 11th sword held the sword with both hands and slashed out. At this moment, Sword 11's face turned ghastly pale. It was as if all the strength in his body had been exhausted by this sword strike. This was truly his full strength. Whoosh! The black light of this sword was like lightning. Suddenly, a wave of faint black sword light surged in the surroundings, as if it was moving the void. A sword like this set off the 11th sword's terrifying might. It was unstoppable and could cut through everything. King Slang's sword art. On the high platform, some of the elders exclaimed in surprise, and their expressions changed. The King Slaying sword technique was a high-level king-grade martial skill of the Xinjiang Gate. To be able to practice the King Slaying sword technique, one must have excellent comprehension ability. Moreover, it was absolutely impossible for an Origin Spirit Realm cultivator to successfully practice it, but Jin 11 had succeeded. Among the elders present, Elder Mei Huoye was secretly smiling at this moment. He stroked his mustache, and his deep brown eyes were very satisfied. Jin 11 was his personal disciple. Although that kid Su Yi could not become his disciple, but at present, that kid probably could not beat this personal disciple of his. Clang! On the battle stage, the golden spear was ear-piercing, and sparks flew. Yuan Qi light shot out violently, shaking the entire battle stage. For many of the spectating disciples, the battle stage was drowned by the strong wind of Yuan Qi, and they could not see the result of Su Yi and GN11. I said, "You'll also lose." On the battle stage, Su Yi's shout came out, and a fierce heat wave rushed over, making people's hair stand on end, accompanied by a red light. In the red light, Su Yi's figure appeared. His hair fluttered behind him, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a smile. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, and as Sword 11's face was deathly pale and he staggered backwards again, a palm print landed directly on Sword 11's body. Bang! The palm print hit, and a muffled sound spread out, and a red light spread out. Puff! Without any turning back, Jin 11 spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body flew out in a straight line and fell heavily below the battle stage. Bang! The ground trembled, and Jin 11 fell together with his sword. The corner of his mouth and the front of his clothes were dripping with blood, and his face was as pale as ash. In his deep eyes there was deep shock. The crowd's expression changed, and shock surged in their eyes. Jin 11 has lost. It took a while for the surrounding disciples to recover. Jin 11 had lost. This time he was defeated in a direct confrontation. In just 2 or 3 moves, Jin 11 was blasted off the battle stage and lost miserably. On the high platform, the elders and protectors looked at Su Yi, and the surging gaze in their eyes had already explained everything. Elder Mei Huai's expression was even more complicated. The disciple that he was most proud of had been defeated, and defeated so cleanly. In Situ Liuyun's eyes, there was a light flickering, surging in her eyes. Boss Su Yi won. Below the battle stage, Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, Wang Fan, Su Jiahui, and the others were overjoyed and were even more excited than if they had won. For them, to be able to stand here today, they were already satisfied. On the battle stage, Su Yi's broadsword returned to its scabbard, and the red yuan qi around his body was restrained. Such a young man, carrying a sword on his back, with long black hair that reached his shoulders, a handsome face, and a tall and straight figure, made people's hearts tremble for no reason. Defeating Jin 11 was all within Su Yi's expectations. Jin 11 had indeed broken through again, but he was only at the 5th level of the Origin Spirit stage. He had also broken through to the 5th level of the Origin Spirit stage in the Myriad Sword battlefield, and had an advantage against those of the same cultivation level. Sweeping his gaze across the battle stages, there didn't seem to be many people left, and many had already been blasted off the battle stage. Bang! Not far away, there was a muffled sound, and a figure was sent flying off the battle stage while vomiting blood. On the battle stage, there was only one youth left. The white light of his battle armor had dimmed a little, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, but he still exuded an extraordinary aura from inside out. His temperament had not changed, and there was a satisfied smile on his face. His gaze was also directed at Su Yi, and it was Situ Muyang. Su Yi nodded. He wasn't surprised by Situ Muyang's victory. As long as he didn't encounter anyone in the top 10 of the Sword Pagoda, Situ Muyang wouldn't have a problem entering the next round. Situ Muyang didn't suffer much when he fought with Zhang Lingyun, who was ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda. PFFF, bang bang. On the battle stages, there were figures vomiting blood and falling off. Many of the battle stages only had one person left. Su Yi's gaze swept across, and he saw many familiar figures. Nan Lilan, Qin Fong, Gu Chunyu. Chapter 534. Following the invisible feeling, Su Yi looked over and saw several beautiful figures. Mu Yao, Gong Qi, Sakura, Asaka. There was also the owner of a cold gaze. His eyes flashed coldly as he looked at Su Yi with a faint sneer. Then he lowered his eyes, and his white clothes set off his tall and slender figure, and returned to calmness. Su Yi smiled faintly. It seemed that this Yun Ling Feng was completely staring at him. It was better not to provoke him, otherwise he would not be polite to him. Bang! The last figure on the last platform flew out. At this moment, there were only 16 people left on the 16 platforms. Clang! When the last figure landed on the dueling platform, a bell suddenly rang on the Spirit Sword Peak. The first round is over. The voice of Ho Changming reverberated on Lingjian Peak. His eyes swept over the 16 disciples on the 16 platforms, and he could not help but be moved. He said, "The 16 disciples who enter the next round can take a rest and recuperate from their injuries. After half an incense stick of time, you will enter the next round. The defeated disciples will leave the inner field." His voice echoed, and the whole field was filled with discussions. The noise was loud and clear. The whole field was in an uproar, talking about the 16 people standing on the platform at this moment. Some of the elders on the high platform were happy, and some were disappointed. Those elders who did not have any disciples who entered the next round were naturally not happy. Senior brother Ryugan River is invincible. Senior sister Gong Qi Senior Brother Qin Fong. Among the spectating disciples, there were people who were cheering for the people standing on the stage. At this moment, every disciple who was still standing on the stage was originally an illustrious existence. They had a group of followers in the Divine Sword sect. Of course, except for Su, Yi, Mu Yao, and Sita Muyang, there seemed to be no one cheering for them in the whole field. Especially Su, Yi, and Situ Muyang. There were many disciples who hated them. Boss Su, Yi will head down first. Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, Su Jiahui, and the others said to Su, Yi as they walked out of the inner area. The next match had nothing to do with them. The other disciples of Shunjian Gate came forward to help those who were seriously injured and couldn't walk out of the inner field. Su Yi nodded at Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others, and then looked around. At this moment, the 16 battle stages were filled with familiar faces. Situ Muyang, Mu Yao, Sakura, Osaka, Gongqi, Yunling Feng, Ryugan River, Oluo, Guchinyu, Nanlilan, Jiang Shiwen, Qin Fong. What surprised Su Yi was that he didn't expect Zhang Lingyu to be among them. He guessed that this guy had obtained a lot of sword pattern stones later on and was able to enter the top 68. There were also 3 young men that Su Yi had an impression of in the myriad sword battlefield. From the shouts of the surrounding disciples, these 3 young men seemed to be called Ouyang Ran, Xia Chanqing, and Yushanhe. These 3 young men should be among the top in the sword pagoda. On the battle stage, many of the remaining 16 people took advantage of the short break to stuff elixirs into their mouths. They closed their eyes and circulated their martial arts to recuperate, striving to be in their best condition. In the previous battle, although the remaining people were the strongest, some of them were injured or at least exhausted. No one dared to be careless. Everyone knew that the remaining people were stronger than those who had just been defeated. No matter which opponent they met in the next round, it would be a fierce battle. It definitely wouldn't be easy. Situ Muyang withdrew his royal wind battlesuit to reduce consumption. He also stuffed an elixir into his mouth and secretly circulated his martial arts to recuperate. There was no carelessness on his young face. At this time, Sita Muyang also realized that these pro-disciples of the Shunjian Gate were not weak. In the distance of the Lingjian Peak, on a towering mountain, a thin figure quietly emerged. His green face and his thin, childlike figure were extremely inconsistent, but the invisible aura on his body made people tremble for no reason. It was the elder of the Surga. He looked at the Lingjian Peak in the distance, and there was a flash of light in his eyes. It seemed that he was prying on something. On the Lingjian Peak, there were shouts, calls, discussions, and all kinds of noises which gathered and soared into the sky. =fast up clang. The melodious bell rang again, silencing the hustle and bustle. On the battle stage, many closed eyes opened in an instant, and there was a flash of light in their eyes. Boom! It was also at this moment that light suddenly flickered on the 16 battle stages. The simple and model battle stages seemed to have come to life. Rays of light appeared, and lines that looked like mysterious runes spread out. Their auras were vast and mighty. Rumble! The whole square seemed to be trembling. The battle stages moved in the square, emitting light, filling the air, and roaring endlessly. The 16 battle stages moved in the inner square, like chess pieces being pushed by people, crisscrossing and moving in different directions. Su Yi was surprised. This seemed to be some kind of magical means. Stepping onto the battleground, Su Yi stood there motionlessly. Around him, the battlegrounds moved and changed. Silhouettes flashed past his eyes one after another. Rumble! All of a sudden, the 16 battle stages collided with each other. Each of them collided with another battle stage and merged together, forming 8 battle stages. On each of the 8 battle stages, there were 2 figures. Su Yi raised his eyes. On the battle stage in front of him, there was one of the 3 direct disciples called Ouyang Ran, Xia Chanqing, and Yushanhe. This young man looked to be around 21 or 22 years old. He was wearing a red robe, and his eyes were lowered, as if he was still immersed in the world he created. He was completely indifferent to the movement on the Heaven's Ascension platform. His slender and beautiful fingers were gently holding the treasured sword in his hand, and his long eyelashes formed a charming and handsome arc on his lowered eyelids. He only glanced at him. He was not careless, nor did he care too much. Then, he curiously looked around. On the other battle stages, Mu Yao was up against Lin Ran. Yunling Feng was up against Jiang Xuan. Sakurasaka was up against Zhang Lingyun, and Gong Qi was up against Qin Fang. O Luo and Gu Qinyu were up against Ouyang Ran, Xia Chongqing, and two of Yushana's disciples. Finally, Sitamiang was up against Ryugan River, who was ranked first in the Sword Pagoda. For Sitamiang to be up against Ryugan River, Su Yi frowned slightly. Boom! When the 8 battle stages were successfully merged, the aura on the battle stage dissipated, the light disappeared, and everything returned to calm. The person in front of you is your opponent for this round. Everything depends on luck. Ho Changming stood in front of the high stage, and his voice, mixed with Yuan Qi, echoed throughout the Lingjian Peak. The second round begins now. Chapter 535. Boom! When the sound spread out, the whole place trembled. The onlooking disciples stared at the battle stage one by one. They were so nervous that their auras surged. It seemed that they were even more nervous than when they went up on stage. Senior brother Ryugan River, go for it. Senior brother Yunling Feng, go for it. Senior sister Sakura Asaka is invincible. All kinds of shouts erupted in an instant, gathering and soaring into the sky. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Tan Xiao, and a dozen other disciples of the 36-Sword Peak who had retreated from the crowd originally wanted to cheer for Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang. However, they also knew how hated Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang were. Those who hated them were all inner disciples and personal disciples, so they didn't dare to shout loudly. They could only silently cheer for them. The shouts were boiling, and the heat wave soared into the sky. The 16 people on the battle stage were all young and vigorous. They had the vanity and recognition that young people should have. They were immediately infected, and the blood in their bodies began to boil. Boom! On the battle stages, a burst of aura suddenly surged out. They were all disciples from the same sect and were quite familiar with each other. There was no need to test and be polite. Fight! Swish! Suddenly, someone directly attacked. Nanli Ran attacked. Her light purple robe fluttered, and the sword light in her hand cut through the void. A young man also attacked. Yuan Qi surged, and the sword in his hand was dark red. Under the infusion of Yuan Qi, it was like flowing blood. It was filled with a fierce aura. The sword light swept out, powerful and terrifying, and stabbed towards Oluo. Come on, Oluo said indifferently. His face was still elegant and handsome, and his eyebrows were like sword light. There was an inexplicable power. He jumped down and unsheathed his sword. He was incomparably powerful and immediately fought with the former. In an instant, the battle stages collided. Bang, bang, bang. The energy collided and the sound was deafening. The sound of metal clashing was sonorous. The energy was like a tidal wave, sweeping out in all directions. In front of Su Yi, the young man also raised his head. A handsome face appeared in front of Su Yi, but the light in his eyes was not to be underestimated. Boom! In a mere instant, the aura of the 5th-level Origin Spirit stage swept out from the youth's body without any reservation. Slightly raising his head, a somewhat solemn expression secretly appeared on his face as he looked at Su Yi and said, "Ranked 14th in the Sword Tower, Ouyang Ran." As soon as he finished speaking, Ouyang Ran stared at Su Yi. He had noticed the defeat of the 11th sword. Although Sword 11 was ranked one place behind him, Ouyang Ran had a rough idea of Sword 11's strength. That ranking had been there for a long time. If he and Sword 11 fought again, he might not be able to win again. Ouyang Ran. Su Yi nodded and smiled. "I'll remember that. I heard that you're Elder Su's disciple, but I won't hold back either," Ouyang Ran said as he looked at Su. "There's no need to hold back. I won't let you win anyway." Su, he said seriously. The reward for the champion of the Shunjian Gates Myriad Sword Conference this time was said to be very sumptuous, and there were also countless benefits. Naturally, he would not hold back. All right, I also want to personally test if you're as strong as the rumors say. When Ouyang Ran's voice fell, he had already quietly formed a hand seal. From inside his body, vigorous primordial chi surged out and formed a red glow in front of him. A scorching fire attribute, aura, immediately swept out and shook the void. PSSH. Ouyang Ran made his move. With a tap of his foot, his figure instantly shot out, as if he was stepping on a scarlet glow. A blazing, fierce, and majestic aura flourished. At the same time, the sword in his hand was like lightning, piercing through the void as it headed towards the space between Su Yi's eyebrows. The speed was too fast. It was fierce and fierce at the same time, incomparably swift. Ouyang Ran was definitely worthy of being ranked 14th in the Sword Pagoda. The fact that he was still standing on the arena was enough to prove that Ouyang Ran was the real deal. Not bad. On the high platform, many elders and protectors had been paying attention to Su Yi. At this moment, they felt Ouyang Ran's attack and were very impressed. PSSSH, the sword was too fast. Su Yi did not have time to dodge at all. Feeling the sword rapidly approaching his forehead, Su Yi's eyes turned cold. Yuan Qi flickered under his feet, and his figure immediately retreated explosively. Cool Craftsman Network Genuine Edition swoosh. The sword light flickered frighteningly. The air fluctuated, and the sound of wind breaking could be heard. Ouyang Ran followed him like a shadow. The tip of his sword suddenly trembled, and a blazing aura split into two. Like two fire snakes, one headed straight for Su Yi's forehead, and the other headed straight for Su Yi's chest. Ouyang Ran's sword actually had such a strange change, which surprised Su Yi. After being stunned for a moment, the Yuan Qi light under Su Yi's feet became even more dazzling. Yuan Qi poured out like a flood in his meridians, and his speed also increased exponentially. In an instant, he turned into an afterimage and directly staggered under the two fire, snake-like sword lights, barely retreating to the side. Seeing that Su Yi had actually dodged his sword move in a flash, Ouyang Ran was also quite stunned. It was as if he did not expect Su Yi's speed to be so fast. However, Ouyang Ran's eyes immediately revealed a smile, as if everything was within his expectations. Ouyang Ran had used all his strength in this sword move, but it was not his real trump card. He knew how powerful Su Yi was. Being able to defeat the 11th sword had already proved everything. How could he not have a plan? At this moment, Ouyang Ran's left arm shook, and a blazing aura immediately erupted. It was as if an open flame was about to spread out from his entire arm. In the next second, Ouyang Ran clenched his fingers into a fist, which was covered in a scarlet light. The blazing temperature exploded, causing his face to immediately appear somewhat illusory under the high temperature. I'm sorry to tell you, but this is my real trump card. A soft shout came from Ouyang Ran, who was somewhat proud and confident at this moment. A fist wrapped in a blazing aura, like a raging flame, directly blasted towards Su Yi. Seeing Ouyang Ran's action and attack again in an instant, it was obvious that he had been prepared. The surrounding disciples fell into a moment of silence, then exclaimed, "Fiery explosive fist, senior brother Ouyang Ran was already prepared." Ouyang Ran is deliberately baiting Su Yi. His combat skills and experience are still too inexperienced. Exclamations of surprise were heard. Su Yi, you're going to stop now. Many of the onlookers looked at Su Yi hatefully, hoping that he would stop. These people included Fu Tongwang, Fu Tongming, and the others who had been directly or indirectly trampled on by Su Yi. Naturally, they did not want Su Yi to continue to the next round. On the high platform, many elders and protectors immediately focused their gazes. Ouyang Ran is smart. An elder praised. In a battle between two people, strength was one thing, but combat experience and skills were also very important. It was very obvious that Ouyang Ran's skills and experience were outstanding at this moment. Everything happened very quickly, and the changes on the arena happened in a flash. When he saw the fist sweeping towards him with a blazing aura, a red light surged in Su Yi's eyes, and a blazing aura seeped out from his body. At the same time, the corners of Su Yi's mouth curled into a faint smile, and a faint voice was heard from his mouth. He said, "I'm really sorry. Your trump card seems to be a little weak." As he spoke, he shook his arm, and the same fist surged out along with a blazing fire attribute vitality. At this moment, a terrifying aura surged on Su Yi's fist, and it was as if there was a dazzling flame on his fist. A violent force exploded in the void in front of him, causing a blazing and ferocious force to explode in the vacuum in front of him. Walala. The force on Su Yi's fist was visible to the naked eye, and it was like layers of fire shadows. It struck down with an earth-shattering force, causing the space to ripple. Everything happened too quickly, and it was obvious that Su Yi was also prepared. When all of this happened, many people's expressions changed, and Ouyang Ran, who was originally confident, was dumbfounded. Boom! A knocked arrow had no choice but to be released. Seeing that Su Yi was similarly prepared, Ouyang Ran had no choice but to pour all his vitality into his left fist. Just as the two fists collided, the power within Ouyang Ran's left fist soared to a whole new level. The shadow of the fist was blurry, and the high temperature caused the surrounding air to emit a strange sound, like boiling water meeting ice. A terrifying aura suddenly erupted from Su Yi's fist before it collided with Lin Dong's fist. This was the Fire Shadow Fist, which came from the Heavenly Tiger technique of the Heavenly Fae ancient scripture. The Heavenly Tiger technique focused on force, and with its force, it could suppress all enemies. At this moment, the expressions of the elders and protectors on the high platform changed, as if they had sensed something. It took a long time to describe, but the two fists collided in an instant. Boom! In an instant, the two blazing auras exploded like flames, splashing out countless sparks. Accompanied by a thunderous explosion, circles of fire waves surged out from the place where the two fists collided. Instantly, a blazing hot aura swept out, causing the surrounding heat to soar into the sky. Even the void trembled because of it. Pwah! Amidst the blazing chi, a figure suddenly flew out. Blood spurted from his mouth as he heavily smashed onto the edge of the battle stage. His body finally slid back for nearly 10 feet as he unstoppably fell off the battle stage. The force dissipated, and on the arena, Su Yi staggered back 2 steps before stabilizing his body. The force on his body had vanished. Everyone who saw this scene was dumbfounded. Boss Su Yi, well done. Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the rest could not help but cheer. Su Yi had defeated his opponent once again, entering the top 8. This kid has such a powerful aura. It's not a cultivation technique from our Shunjin gate, right? Even I can't see through it. Chapter 536. Elder Zhang-san, what do you think? Situ Liuyun's eyes flickered with light as she asked the second elder, Zhang-san Luhen, in a low voice. Interesting. Elder Changsun only said these 3 words, and his pair of black eyes emitted a deep light. Below the stage, Ouyang Ran crawled up. He was in a sorry state with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. His eyes were dull, as though he couldn't believe that he had lost. As the person involved, Ouyang Ran could feel how terrifying Su Yi's punch was. That aura was too terrifying. Su Yi stood on the stage and swept his gaze across the stage. No matter who could enter the next round, they would all be his opponents. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will win 100 battles. PFFF, someone spat out blood and was sent flying, crashing onto the stage. The person who was sent flying was Yun Lingfeng's opponent, Jiang Shiwen. The origin energy under his feet was scattered, and there were several sword wounds on his body. I've lost. Jiang Shiwen spoke, knowing that he was no match for Qin Wentian. The difference was too great. Yin Lingfeng's expression was indifferent, as though everything was as it should be. His gaze then shifted to the stage where Su Yi was at. Seeing that the blue-robed young man was still there, Yin Lingfeng's lips curled up coldly. Bang! A faint purple figure was sent flying out of the stage, crashing onto the ground. It was Mu Yao's opponent, Nan Linen. How is this possible? How can you be so strong? Below the stage, Nan Linen stood up. His pale face stared at the young lady in orange. His eyes were filled with shock. Gee, not far away, the screech of a ferocious bird could be heard from a stage. Resplendent light erupted. From Situ Muyang's feet, the phantom of a black rock spread its wings and soared into the sky. Its wingspan was several feet long, and black light permeated the air. Its ferocious eyes were like small blood moons, emitting a ferocious aura. Roar! When the phantom of a black rock appeared, its beast might permeated the air, causing the entire stage to change color. Origin energy transformation. Is this the Nether Void Rock? Someone exclaimed. This was the Nether Void Rock, a true barbaric, demonic beast of the demon race. Fight! Situ Muyang's eyes were full of fighting spirit. His eyes were clear, and his hair was messy. He stepped on the phantom black rock and soared into the sky. Black light surged fiercely and swooped down towards Ryugan River, causing the surrounding void to tremble. So, what's a Nether Void Rock? Ryugan River faintly smiled. His cloud-like robes were simple and elegant, but when his aura erupted, it was as if he was a completely different person. Boom! Metal elemental Yuan Qi erupted from Ryugan River's body. He stretched out his hand, his palm glowing with a golden light, and slapped forward. The handprint expanded with the wind and instantly became several feet in size, as if it was slapping down from the void. Situ Muyang fought with the Nether Void Rock and clashed with it. Instantly, the two of them erupted with light, rays, and muffled sounds like thunder. Strong gales swept up like thunder and shook the void. However, the Nether Void Rock was shattered. Ryugan River's strength was too strong. Boom! Situ Muyang's aura suddenly surged. The Imperial Wind battlesuit flapped and soared into the sky. Strong gales howled around his body, and bright light rays rose like the sun. He directly stomped down on Ryugan River, powerful and swift. This was Situ Muyang's Stormy Waves kick. It caused the void to boil, and light rays and storms converged. The sound was ear-splitting, as if it was going to shatter the void. It made one's heart tremble. Ryugan River's expression changed. However, at the same time, he did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward and punched upwards. As he raised his fist, there were electric arcs fluctuating. The aura was fierce and domineering. The fist and palm collided, and a deafening boom sounded. The aftershock of the Yuan Qi scattered in all directions, and the wind howled like a raging flood. Chila! Dang dang! Situ Muyang was sent flying. Finally, he landed on the ground and staggered a few steps back. At this moment, his face had turned pale, and the Imperial Wind battlesuit on his body had started to dim. Very strong. Su Yi's gaze fell onto Ryugan River. Su Yi had a rough idea of Situ Muyang's strength. With his cultivation at the 4th level of Origin Spirit stage, coupled with his talent and the Imperial Wind battlesuit, he would not be defeated by an ordinary 5th level Origin Spirit stage practitioner. Ryugan River did not seem to be holding back. However, Su Yi could sense that Ryugan River had not truly used his full strength. Situ Muyang stabilized his retreat. With a stomp of his foot, he stared at Ryugan River in front of him. There was not the slightest bit of carelessness in his expression. However, the fighting intent in his eyes did not decrease, and a hand seal was rapidly condensing in his hand. Boom! As the hand seal condensed, energy fluctuations began to appear around Situ Muyang's body. The Imperial Wind battlesuit on his body dissipated, but a deep black light gushed out from the surface of his body. The deep black light instantly covered Situ Muyang's entire body, transforming into a dense scale armor on his body. At the same time, his body also began to expand. This brat, on the high platform, Situlian's eyebrows faintly twitched as she stared at the stage with a slightly nervous gaze. There was anticipation, concern, and a rather complicated feeling. There were quite a few gazes in the arena that were filled with astonishment. At a rate visible to the naked eye, Situ Muyang's body seemed to have expanded by a size. His clear eyes turned cold and sharp, while his body seemed to be covered in a black, glowing scale armor. At this moment, Situ Muyang seemed to have transformed into a human-shaped ferocious bird. Energy gales howled around him, causing the surrounding space to tremble. At this moment, deep mysterious runes surfaced on Situ Muyang's body. They appeared to be ancient runes that contained the energy of the world and supreme mysteries, and were able to communicate with the heavens and the earth. From Situ Muyang's body, an ancient bird's cry resounded faintly, reverberating in the void and resonating in all directions. At this moment, the barbaric beasts resting in the distance of the Spirit Sword Peak also seemed to have felt something. They roared in response and trembled secretly. Boom! On the stage, the wind and clouds surged. Waves of invisible energy of the world poured into Situ Muyang's body, causing his momentum to soar. The entire stage was also trembling. The stage had been set up a long time ago. Otherwise, at this moment, it would have collapsed inch by inch. Su Yi's eyes moved. Even from afar, he could feel the terrifying momentum of Situ Muyang. This was the real trump card of this guy. At this moment, from Situ Muyang's body, Su Yi could also feel the aura of the demon clan. This aura was demonic but not evil. It was ancient and vast, revealing an astonishing pressure. Fight! With a loud shout, Situ Muyang's figure swept out like a rock spreading its wings. He stretched out his right hand, and his 5 fingers were slightly bent, as if they were covered with thick black scales. The black light was deep, as if it was made of black divine iron, expanding and expanding. Swoosh, wherever the claw passed, 5 straight air dents appeared in the void, tearing the air apart. Its power was terrifying, making everyone who saw it dumbfounded. At this moment, Ryugan River was also completely moved. His eyes darkened, his robe fluttered, and a sword appeared in his hand. At the same time, the sword body was like wind and thunder. Sword light swept out in an instant, flashing and arranging, and finally formed a small sword light tide. This sword light tide, with a fierce momentum, immediately collided with the ripples spread out by Situ Muyang's claw, and then collapsed at the same time. Walala! The airwaves surged and scattered violently. The sword and the claw, as if open amaze, swept out from the terrible wind, and finally collided heavily. Clang! Clang! When the sword light and the claw collided, the sound of golden spears resounded, and sparks flew everywhere. On the high platform, at this moment, Situ, Muyang, and many elders' brows suddenly tightened together. Swoosh within Situ Muyang's claw, flames splashed, and the golden spears did not stop. Then he staggered back. With every step Situ Muyang took back, the black light on his body and the claw disappeared, and his figure returned to normal. When the last step stabilized, Situ Muyang also retreated to the edge of the arena. His face was pale, and there was some blood on the corner of his mouth. On his palm, there was a sword mark, and it was overflowing with blood. Ryugan River also took a few steps back, and the neat black hair tied up with a bamboo hairpin was a little messy. Give me 2 more years. No, 1 more year, and I will definitely defeat you. Situ Muyang looked at Ryugan River, waved his sleeve to wipe the blood on the corner of his mouth, and said seriously. As soon as he finished speaking, Situ Muyang turned around and leaped down from the dueling stage. He already knew that he could not defeat Ryugan River. NS, VU version B, 6 shots T. Looking at Situ Muyang's back, Ryugan River's eyes moved slightly, but at this moment there was a wave of shock in his heart. How old was Situ Muyang? But he had already reached such a level. When he was this age, he could not compare at all. At this moment, Ryugan River could not help but begin to doubt the talent that he had always been proud of. Compared to the young man in front of him, his talent was nothing. As expected of someone who came back from there, on the high platform, second elder Zhang Sunluan and third elder Wu Qiuyang were both amazed and shocked. In Situ Muyang's eyes, there was a hint of a smile that surged out, and then it returned to calmness. The spectating disciples who had just seen the battle between Situ Muyang and Ryugan River were still immersed in shock. Although Situ Muyang took the initiative to get down from the arena, at this moment, no one dared to doubt Situ Muyang's strength. How many disciples in the Shunjian Gate could make Ryugan River use his sword? Moreover, Situ Muyang was so young, and yet he was already so terrifying. No one doubted that if they were of the same age, Ryugan River would not be Situ Muyang's opponent. This was a true monster. PFFF, bang bang. The battles on the surrounding arenas were also coming to an end, and there was a violent surge. Zhang Lingyun was defeated by Sakura Asaka, and she herself was seriously injured in the myriad sword battlefield. Although she had recovered a lot these days, it was impossible for her to fully recover. What's more, Zhang Lingyun's strength was also inferior to Sakura Asaka, so it was naturally difficult for her to enter the next round. Qin Fang's luck did not seem to be very good. Gong Qi seemed to have a belly full of anger that could not find a place to vent. As soon as he attacked, he directly blasted him off the arena. O Luo and Gu Chunyu also defeated the young man named Xia Chongqing and Yu Shanhe, respectively, and entered the next round. Clang! The bell rang again on the Lingjian Peak. The second round of the battle is over. Congratulations to the 8 people who are still on the arena. After half an incense stick of time, the remaining 8 people will enter the next round of the battle. Opponents will depend on luck. Chapter 537. As Ho Changming's voice spread out, the surroundings suddenly boiled and resounded with earth-shattering cheers. Such a duel was an eye-opener for them. Senior brother Ryugan River is invincible. Senior brother Yun Lingfeng will definitely win the championship. Senior sister Gongqi, come on. The disciples on their respective sword peaks, as well as their followers, were all cheering for the people who were still on the platform. There were still 8 people on the 8 platforms. They were Nether Demon, Ryugan River, Yun Lingfeng, Sakura Asaka, Gongqi, Oluo, Gu Chunyu, and Sui. That kid actually entered the top 8. In the crowd of onlookers, Fu Tongming's eyes were extremely cold and his face was pale. His future in this life had been completely ruined. Today, he specially came to Lingjian Peak to see someone deal with that kid. Don't worry. When the time comes, someone will naturally make that kid pay the price and avenge you. Fu Tingguang's face was also gloomy. He looked at the blue-robed youth on the dual platform with a cold gaze. In the myriad sword battlefield, that youth also ruined his future. The remaining people on the dual platform were also not careless at this time. Although half an hour was not long, everyone was seizing the time to adjust their breathing. The deafening cheers and shouts all around made people's eardrums hurt. Glancing around, He also paid attention to the duels on the dual platforms around him. For the remaining direct disciples of Xinjiang Gate, his heart was a little more dignified. There was no doubt that the Myriad Sword Conference of Xinjiang Gate was to verify the strength of this year's disciples and to select the top strength of this year's disciples. From the duels among these direct disciples, it was not difficult for Yi to see that Xinjiang Gate was worthy of being a big sect. The teaching of its disciples was not simple. Yi originally thought that even if he did not have a master, he could still pass the test and not be inferior to those disciples of big sections. From a certain perspective, this was indeed the case. Yi had also reached this step. However, at this moment, Yi clearly felt that at least the disciples of Xinjiang Gate were not flowers in a greenhouse as he had originally imagined. Instead, they were all very experienced and had gone through many hardships. Especially the tempering in the battlefield of myriad swords, it was absolutely open. Every step was filled with danger, and one could be killed at any time. This gave Yi a new understanding of those large sections. For those large sects to be able to stand tall and not fall and be revered by tens of thousands of people. Their disciples were the foundation of their future. Their nurturing was definitely not ordinary. Those outstanding figures of the younger generation were definitely not flowers in a greenhouse. They had all gone through tempering, otherwise they wouldn't be able to become experts in the future. As for the remaining 7 people, Su-yi reckoned that no matter which one he encountered, it would not be easy. There was no doubt that the remaining 7 people were the best of the best. Of course, Su-yi was not afraid. Instead, his heart was filled with fighting spirit. Today's goal was to prove himself. Clang! Just when Su-yi was slightly distracted, the bell rang again. Boom! The 8 dueling platforms roared again. The light was dazzling and moving around, causing the void to roar and the entire Lingjian peak to tremble. Rumble! The 8 dueling platforms touched the ice and merged into 4. The 8 disciples faced each other. Ryugan River was up against Oluo. Muyao was up against Gu Chunyu. Yinling Feng was up against Sakura Asaka. And Su-yi was up against a familiar figure, Gong Qi, who was ranked 6th in the Sword Pagoda. This round of duels begins. Ho Changming's voice once again resounded throughout the Lingjian peak, melodiously reverberating. Boom! At this moment, on the dueling platforms, auras surged. No one was careless. Among the last 8 people, who would be weak? Gu Qinyu's face was even more dignified at this moment. He had a tall and slender figure, sharp eyebrows, and a high nose bridge. He was very handsome. However, Gu Qinyu's expression was somewhat helpless as he looked at the orange-clothed lady in front of him. He seemed to be hesitating about something. Subsequently, he bowed towards Mu Yao and tightly pursed his thin lips as he opened his mouth and said, "I know your identity. This is the duel stage. Forgive this disciple for not being modest. You don't have an identity. Everything depends on your strength. Do you think I need you to give in? Then, I'll kill you first." Mu Yao raised her eyebrows and shook her arm. Her slender fingers were like jade and were filled with light. Suddenly, she slapped directly at Gu Chunyu. Gu Chunyu didn't expect that Mu Yao would actually make a move in an instant. A trace of scarlet color flashed through his pair of pitch-black eyes. In an instant, his body emitted an oppressive aura for no reason, and he raised his hand to meet the attack with his palm. Bang! The two were on the verge of breaking out and immediately fought fiercely. Let's fight! The atmosphere in the arena was tense. As Gu Chunyu and Mu Yao made their moves, it was as if a bomb had been ignited. Boom! Oluo and Sakura Asaka also attacked Ryugan River and Yunling Feng at the same time. Looks like you're not very lucky. At the same time, Gong Qi's face was full of smiles. She looked even more charming. With a smile in her almond-shaped eyes, she walked lightly towards Su-yi. Su-yi raised his eyebrows. His luck was indeed not very good. He actually met this woman who had been pestering him. Where can you escape to this time? I won't show you any mercy. Gong Qi smiled. She had been waiting for this opportunity. She must teach this lecher a lesson. Beating is a sign of affection. Scolding is a sign of love. I understand. Su-yi smiled slightly. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he slowly straightened his body. You're still so annoying at this time. You're so shameless at such a young age. I'll cut off your tongue later. Gong Qi scolded. She must not let this kid off so easily. How am I shameless? Su-yi muttered. Moreover, he was not young anymore. If he counted his previous life, he was about the same age as this girl. Senior Gong Qi, teach that kid a lesson. Senior Gong Qi, don't show any mercy. Teach that kid Su-yi a lesson. As Gong Qi faced Su-yi, the whole arena suddenly erupted with tsunami-like cheers. At this moment, many people around the arena hoped that Su-yi would be taught a lesson. It could be considered as a way to vent their anger. Ouyang Ran's defeat just now allowed Su-yi to enter the top 8. At this moment, many people's hopes were pinned on Gong Qi. Even many followers who were not Gong Qi joined the crowd to cheer for Su-yi at this moment. They wanted to teach Gong Qi a lesson. This kid is really detestable. In the crowd, Fu Tongwang, Fu Tongming, and Xiong Di sneered coldly. This kid has offended many people. The elders and protectors on the high platform heard the most uproar and deafening cheers and smiled bitterly. In the battlefield of 10,000 swords, Su-yi is too ruthless. The right protector also smacked his lips and smiled bitterly. In the battlefield of 10,000 swords, Su-yi had offended almost all the inner disciples and personal disciples. Hearing the cheers and shouts from all around, Su-yi felt helpless. It seems that you're quite detestable. Gong-chi stopped in front of Su-yi and was less than 10 feet away. Hearing the cheers coming from all around, she looked at Su-yi and seemed to be very satisfied. I can't help it. If everyone likes me and understands me, how ordinary would I be? They don't understand me, and I don't blame them. Su-yi smiled faintly. Hearing Su-yi's words, Gong-chi couldn't help but ponder for a while. She felt that these words were quite profound. But then, Gong-chi looked at Su-yi with deep disdain and said, "How shameless." Looking at Gong-chi's expression, Su-yi smiled. Although this woman has a hot temper, she has a straightforward personality. I can't be bothered to talk nonsense with you. I must teach you a lesson today. As soon as Gong-chi finished speaking, an aura burst out from her delicate body. The green light was dazzling and mist filled the air. In the end, it seemed as if a layer of water curtain was formed around her body, wrapping her delicate body in it. From afar, it looked like layers of boiling and surging waves. At this moment, Gong-chi was completely focused. She looked at Su-yi and did not let her guard down. After being taken advantage of last time, she knew that this kid was not weak. Boom! Yuan-chi also surged from Su-yi's body. It was as if he was constantly breathing and was shrouded in a layer of red Yuan-chi light shield. Su-yi knew Gong-chi's strength. He was able to take advantage of her last time because Gong-chi was too careless. This time, this woman was prepared. Swish! The two confronted each other for a short while. Then, the aura of the two suddenly changed. In an instant, under the gazes of many people, they collided with each other. Bang bang! The two figures were so fast that it was a little dazzling. Muffled sounds and strong winds swept out from the center of the collision. In such a confrontation, many of the spectating disciples could only see two blurry lights and shadows intertwining. The surrounding air was constantly shaken by the collision. The Yuan-chi light was dazzling, and the two auras seemed to be equally tyrannical. Buzz, after a dozen moves, Gong-chi's beautiful phoenix eyes surged with graveness. A sword appeared in her delicate hand. The sword hummed incessantly, and the light fluctuated. The level of the sword was extraordinary. The sword light burst out. Swish! A sword also appeared in Su-yi's hand. The sword light broke through the wind. The level of the sword in Su-yi's hand was far inferior to the sword in Gong-chi's hand. However, Su-yi was able to wield it freely. With the infusion of Yuan-chi from Su-yi, every time he swung the sword, there would be an astonishing sound of wind breaking and sword light. The sword light tore through the air. The fierce wind made people's hair stand on end. Read the original chapter of PC Edition. However, when they saw Su-yi using a sword, the elders and protectors on the high platform were all astonished. With their eyesight, how could they not see that Su-yi's swordsmanship had no martial skills to speak of at all? It was completely based on the basic swordsmanship of the sword. Draw, carry, lift, block, strike, stab, point, collapse, stir, press, chop, cut, lift, swipe. However, these most ordinary and simple sword moves were like moving clouds and flowing water in Su-yi's hands. He was able to counter every move and neutralize Gong-chi's waves of attacks. Chapter 538. It was just that no matter how fierce and powerful Gong-chi's offensive was, even if she crushed Su-yi, she could never completely suppress Su-yi. The two occasionally collided with each other again and again, and the swords made a roaring sound, but they also separated upon contact. H2 First Mississippi Su-yi did not give Gong-chi a chance to resist at all. Su-yi knew very well that the sword in his hand could not be compared with the sword in Gong-chi's hand. It was extremely unfavorable for him to fight head-on. At this moment, Su Yi was using the basics of using the sword in the foundation of sword. In the past few days, under the guidance of Elder Su Yi had learned a lot, and it was just the right time to practice. All of the sword techniques and sword moves were derived from these basic swordsmanship. Su Yi wanted to refine his foundation. This kid is worth teaching. On a distant mountain peak, a thin figure murmured softly as he stared at the spirit sword peak with his eyes shining brightly. On the dueling platform, the sword light crisscrossed and the figure flashed. Yuan Qi and sword light blended together, constantly gushing out and spreading, emitting amazing ripples of wind. This guy is so strong. Is he using me to sharpen his sword? Gong Qi secretly said. She felt the purpose of Su Yi. No matter how fast she was, she could not touch the opponent's body. This guy's strength was even more terrifying. Occasionally, when they collided, the sword in her hand was obviously of a much higher level, but the impact made her palm a little numb. This was the impact caused by that guy's Yuan Qi. How much Yuan Qi did he need? This made Gong Qi even more shocked. Swoosh, swoosh, the sword in her hand struck out like lightning. A green light filled the air, and the water attribute Yuan Qi broke out. However, no matter how Gong Qi attacked, she could not completely suppress Su Yi. It can't go on like this. The look on Gong Qi's face was completely covered by a dignified look. She had to be cautious because of the strength shown by Su Yi. At this moment, she was also completely sure that it was absolutely not a coincidence that Su Yi could reach this step. Qila. The two figures separated as soon as they touched. Gong Qi took the opportunity to retreat quickly with a solemn expression on her charming face. Who? Gong Qi secretly took a deep breath. The green Yuan Qi on the surface of his body suddenly began to change color, and the surging momentum on his body immediately turned sharp. In an instant, the sword in Gong Qi's hand was also wrapped in a sharp golden light. With the change in his aura, Gong Qi's aura also became sharper with a kind of murderous aura. The metal elemental Yuan Qi on the surface of his body surged and connected with the sword in his hand. Boom! With Gong Qi as the center, a mighty and sharp aura swept out unreservedly and filled the entire arena. The golden light was dazzling, resplendent, and the aura was terrifying. Metal attribute. Peak 5th level origin spirit realm. Su Yi's eyes moved. Gong Qi's main attribute was actually the metal attribute. No wonder his temper was so irritable. With his peak 5th level origin spirit realm aura, it was likely that he was already half a step into 6th level origin spirit realm. This also caused Su Yi's expression to change. Although Jian Shi and Ouyang Ran had both reached 5th level origin spirit realm, they were much weaker than Gong Qi. Gong Qi did not say anything. Golden light surged in his phoenix eyes as he suddenly raised his arm and pushed off the ground. His figure shot forward as the sword in his hand pierced out, transforming into a large expanse of sword shadows. Hula! Immediately, a sharp and murderous aura spread out, causing the surrounding space to ripple. Sensing his opponent's aura, Su Yi's eyes turned slightly cold. The sword in his hand immediately danced rapidly as rays of scorching sword light spread out, forming a sword wall in front of him. Clang, 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 clang. The crisp sounds of metal clashing resounded as sparks flew when the sword light collided. Murderous aura and scorching heat spread out as resplendent rays of light erupted, causing the dueling stage to rumble endlessly. Many gazes fell on Su Yi and Gong Qi, their eyes trembling as they watched the intense collision. This girl and youth were too powerful. There was naturally no need to say much about Gong Qi. Being ranked 7th in the Sword Pagoda, he had always been an incomparably powerful existence in the eyes of the disciples. However, Su Yi's current performance had truly caused the surrounding gazes to be dumbfounded. If Su Yi's consecutive defeats of Jian Shi and Ouyang Ran had shocked them. However, Su Yi's current performance had already caused everyone to be shocked. Only now did those doubtful gazes finally understand Su Yi's true strength. Within the myriad sword battlefield, Su Yi's various evasions and sneak attacks were only because he did not want to fight head-on. Clang, 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 clang. Rays of sword light collided, explaining to the crowd what the true strength of this generation of Shanjian Gate disciples was. They were so powerful, so terrifying, and had exceeded many people's imaginations. Break it! Gong Qi raised his phoenix-like eyes. He was actually unable to break through Su Yi's sword net defense. Seeing this, the sword in his hand rotated and golden light fluctuated. The sword move suddenly changed. An array of golden sword light burst out, piercing toward the center of Su Yi's sword net. Whoosh! This sword was intertwined with golden light. It was so dazzling that it was difficult for people to look directly at it and open their eyes. This sword seemed to have the power to pierce through everything, sharp and murderous. Su Yi raised his eyebrows. This Gong Qi was extraordinarily strong, much stronger than Ouyang Ran and Jian Shi. The sword light in his hand danced a little faster. Swish! The sword pierced forward, and its aura was monstrous. Golden light erupted, and a murderous aura swept out. Accompanied by the sound of metal clashing, the sword light was like a tide, drowning the dueling platform. The onlookers were shocked, and everyone who saw this duel was stunned. The duel between Su Yi and Gong Qi had reached such a level. Ka-ka! Su Yi's dancing sword light emitted a cracking sound, and then it was completely broken, blown away by the impact. Ding, ding. Su Yi's footsteps staggered, and several cracks appeared on the sword in his hand as he took a few steps back. Su Yi was at a disadvantage in terms of sword moves, and he had only been using the most basic sword moves. Whoosh! Gong Qi took advantage of the situation, and this was a rare opportunity. In a duel between experts, victory and defeat was often decided in an instant. The sword hummed, and the tip of the sword flickered. Golden light filled the air, and a murderous sword light pierced toward Su Yi. Su Yi's eyes darkened. At this moment, the Yuan Qi in his body also changed, and even his aura changed in an instant. The sword in his hand began to glow, and a sharp aura swept out, accompanied by a cold aura colliding with the sword light. This was the Ice Shadow Sword Art from the Demon Spirit Truth. The Demon Spirit Truth focused on spirit, and it could use the spirit to attract the power of 10,000 beasts. The attack contained a soul attack, and it could borrow the power of 10,000 beasts. Su Yi didn't know many sword techniques, and at this moment, he used the Ice Shadow Sword Art to meet the attack. The sword attack also carried a terrifying power. Chila, the golden spear did not stop, and a dazzling light burst out, and a strong wind swept across. Gong Qi's expression changed, and her soul seemed to be affected for no reason. Ka-ka! The sword in Su Yi's hand cracked, and a gap appeared. The sword was at a disadvantage. Gong Qi didn't gain any advantage, and her sword was blocked. The terrifying rebound caused her to be affected, and a muffled groan came from her throat, and her blood surged. Chila! Yuan Qi swept out from the soles of his feet, and Su Yi took advantage of the situation, and his figure moved like a ghost. Gong Qi was shocked, and her beautiful figure quickly retreated. But Su Yi's speed was like a shadow at this moment. Swoosh! In a panic, Gong Qi raised her hand, and a golden sword light suddenly swept out. At the same time, Su Yi moved closer, and had already reached Gong Qi's side. It seemed dangerous, but he just happened to avoid the sword. His body spun, and in an unbelievable moment, Su Yi took advantage of the situation to raise his hand at the same time, and his elbow heavily hit Gong Qi's right wrist that was holding the sword. Clang! The huge impact caused the sword in Gong Qi's hand to fall to the ground. Her entire arm was numb and painful. Her beautiful phoenix eyes changed greatly, and Gong Qi's beautiful figure quickly retreated without caring about anything else. Don't move, or you'll be disfigured. Suddenly, a faint voice sounded in her ears. Instinctively, Gong Chi immediately stopped, and her phoenix eyes were startled. Only then did she feel a sword that was riddled with holes. But at this moment, it was pressed against her face, and there was a cold aura, causing the hair on her skin to stand on end. A hand also passed through her slim waist and gently held her. Gong Chi's eyebrows suddenly shrank, and the sword on her face made her heart feel cold. But the hand on her waist also made her embarrassed and furious. "Don't move. If you're disfigured, you won't be able to see anyone in the future." A faint voice came from Su Yi's mouth and into Gong Chi's ears again. At this moment, with Wen Yu in his arms, under the faint fragrance, Su Yi took a deep breath, and it smelled quite good. "Su Yi, you bastard. I'm not done with you." Gong Chi came back to her senses and slowly looked to the side with some difficulty. Looking at Su Yi's face in front of her, she suddenly shouted angrily. But as a girl, under the instinctive fear of disfigurement, Gong Chi really did not dare to act rashly. "If you admit defeat, I will let you go. Otherwise, this sword can only be pressed against your face. If I am not careful, you will be disfigured. Not to mention that I have been holding you like this. I am afraid that your suitors will be jealous." Su Yi said softly. At this moment, looking at this woman at such a close distance, her delicate face was very pleasing to the eye, especially those towering breasts, which seemed to be the real deal under the constraints of the tight clothes. Her waist was so soft that it seemed boneless, and the curve under it was perky. It made Su Yi have the urge to slide his hand down and explore what was going on. "Beast, what are you thinking about?" Su Yi secretly scolded himself. "This is the duel stage. What am I thinking about?" When the scene on the duel stage appeared at this moment, everyone was completely dumbfounded. Everyone looked from afar and could only see that Su Yi was holding Gong Chi in his arms, and that posture was simply filled with endless tenderness and sweetness. "Su Yi, what are you doing? Let go of senior sister Gong Chi." "Su Yi, I'm not done with you. Let go of senior sister Gong Chi." "My heart is broken. Su Yi, you can't blaspheme my senior sister Gong Chi." In a short moment, many young people below came back to their senses, and one by one, they could not bear it and were about to go crazy. Gong Chi was the goddess in their hearts, and could only be seen from afar and not touched. Chapter 539. Little bastard, I admit defeat. Let me go. Listening to the angry voices around her, Gong Chi couldn't care about anything else at this moment. Her delicate face flushed red for no reason. "You admit defeat? That's good." Su Yi smiled and immediately retreated far away. It was better to stay away from this woman. "Little bastard, you." Gong Chi glared at Su Yi with a trace of blood overflowing from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes seemed to be about to pop out. "I'm not done with you." Listening to the indignant voices around her at this moment, Gong Chi's face flushed red. Then she turned around and jumped off the arena with hatred. On the high platform, the elders and protectors were trembling at this moment. Naturally, they saw clearly how Su Yi won, so they were even more shocked. "Good boy, you're so skillful and unfathomable," second elder whispered. His eyes flickered. With his eyesight, he still couldn't see the real depth of Su Yi's strength at this moment. He couldn't help but be moved. Now I'm a little convinced that it was this boy who went to the 7th floor of the heavenly platform that caused the heavenly platform to malfunction. Third Elder Wu Xiaoyang slowly exhaled and sighed softly in amazement. How could he not see that Su Yi still hadn't used his real strength? He was holding back. Initial Yu-Hair, the battle between Su Yi and Gong Chi seemed to be fierce and tense, but in fact, it seemed that they were just honing themselves. Such a young man had reached such a level at such a young age. He began to believe that the heavenly platform malfunctioned a month ago because Su Yi went to the 7th floor, not because the heavenly platform malfunctioned. Senior sister Gong Chi lost. Around the square, many people were stunned. No one expected that Su Yi would win, and it seemed that it wasn't particularly difficult for him to win. Gong Chi, whom they had placed their hopes on, was defeated so miserably. Many people stared at the eye-catching young man with crossed swords on his back on the arena. They were shocked. Before, when Sui defeated He Dongxiu and others, they were only surprised and extremely curious. In a battlefield of 10,000 swords, they really realized how powerful Sui was. But many of them were just rumors. Many people didn't see it with their own eyes, so they were not really shocked. On Lingjian Peak, Sui defeated Jian 11 and Ouyang ran again. This made people really realize how terrifying Sui was. He was a terrifying guy, and now Sui defeated Gongqi in an undefeated manner. This made everyone know that from now on, Sui's name would have a new status in the entire Shenzhen Gate. No one would doubt Sui's strength. He could defeat Gongqi at such a young age. In the entire Shenzhen Gate, how many people could be found? In this battle, Sui defeated Gongqi, which made all doubts disappear. Boom! At the same time that Gongqi was defeated, on the side of the arena, a four-winged earth-fire beast formed by Yuanqi shattered. Puff! In a monstrous aura, accompanied by the brilliant Yuanqi light, Gu Qinyu flew out and vomited blood. The sword in his hand fell, and his whole body fell off the arena. On the arena, Mu Yao's face was dignified. The light on her body fluctuated, and the sword in her hand emitted a buzzing sound of wind and thunder. Mu Yao paid no attention to the defeated Gu Qinyu, and her gaze swept through the surroundings. After that, intentionally or unintentionally, her gaze descended on Sui, and a wisp of displeasure gushed out from her eyes. It seems that this time's Myriad Sword Conference will be a real battle between dragons and tigers. On the high platform, an elder exclaimed with a smile. In this Myriad Sword Conference, the strength of all the disciples was above that of the previous sessions. This was the great fortune of Shenzhen Gate. Sakura Asaka, Oluo, and Yin Lingfeng were still fighting fiercely with Ryugan River. Yin Lingfeng and Sakura Asaka had both drawn their swords. At this moment, the aura on Yin Lingfeng's body was incomparably fierce, with an incomparably powerful aura. His sword light swept out, bringing with it a strong wind that tore the air apart. Sakura Asaka's eyes were solemn. Her beautiful eyes were filled with splendor, and the wood attribute Yuanqi on her body surged. Her fair hands swept out, and the sword light was like a tide. She did not dodge, but met the attack head-on. Boom! This battle was very intense, and the sword light was resplendent. Yin Lingfeng's attacks were swift and fierce, crushing Sakura Asaka's attacks time and time again. Sakura Asaka's body was covered in a green glow. Her entire body was covered in green light, and she looked like a fairy. Her sword light was like rain, but it was still not enough. Finally, Sakura Asaka gave it her all. The aura of the 6th level of Origin Spirit Realm gushed out from her body. Her sword moves became strange, and along with the continuous palm strikes, it exploded with astonishing power. Enveloped in green light, Sakura Asaka's entire body seemed to have transcended the mortal world. She perfectly displayed her strength and beauty, and it was incomparably moving. However, Yin Lingfeng was even stronger. He leapt forward, and sword light surged. Sword light was everywhere, violent and beautiful. The light was resplendent, and it brought about gusts of strong wind. Ryugan River and Oluo's battle was also intense. Oluo's sword light was resplendent, and it was swift and strange. Ryugan River's divine bravery was unstoppable. The two of them constantly clashed, and it was as if both of them were invincible. Oluo's speed was very fast, and his figure moved from east to west, leaving behind afterimages. He was incomparably powerful. However, every time Oluo attacked, he was blocked by Ryugan River. Terrifying Yuanqi exploded from the two of them, and the rumbling sounds of energy colliding were incessant. It was intense and shocking. There was no doubt that the battle between Oluo, Sakura, Asaka, Ryugan River, and Yin Lingfeng was much more intense than the battle between Sui and Gongqi, Mu Yao, and Gu Qinyu. The battle between the four of them was shocking, and they had all kinds of trump cards and ultimate moves. Too powerful, all the disciples exclaimed. There were even some disciples from the previous batch who were trembling in fear. Even if they went up, it would be difficult for them to stop such a battle. The four of them were young, but they were so powerful. Not bad, not bad. The elders and protectors on the high platform nodded their heads as they watched the battle between the remaining four people. They were gratified. Su Yi's gaze also fell on the battle between the remaining four people, and he was secretly shocked. The four of them were indeed very powerful, and they were worthy of being the ones ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda. Chila. Finally, someone showed a flaw. Sakura Asaka was suppressed by Yun Lingfeng's sword light, and her beautiful figure staggered back. Boom! Yun Lingfeng pressed forward, and his body emitted a dazzling golden yuan qi light that made people unable to look at him directly. He struck out with one hand, and his palm was densely covered in golden light, revealing mysterious patterns, and his aura made people's hearts palpitate. This is the golden light sky shaking seal. Yun Lingfeng actually succeeded in cultivating it. When an entire palm print appeared, the elders on the high platform exclaimed in surprise. The golden light sky shaking seal was a profound martial technique of the Shenzhen Gate. Those who were not extremely talented could not cultivate it, and it had a very high cultivation requirement. However, it was very powerful, and once it was used, it had the power to move mountains and overturn seas. Among the group of elders, Elder by Mingshan secretly smiled. Yin Lingfeng was his favorite disciple, and he was proud of him. Everything happened very quickly. Yin Lingfeng's palm print landed, and Sakura Asaka could not dodge it. She avoided her vital parts, but the palm print landed on her shoulder. Puff, spitting out a mouthful of blood, Sakura Asaka's delicate body was sent flying, and she landed heavily on the edge of the platform. Her shoulder was also bleeding profusely. I've lost. Sakura Asaka struggled to get up, and her face was pale. She was severely injured, and it was difficult for her to continue fighting. She also knew that there was a gap between her and Yun Lingfeng. There was no point in continuing the battle, and her injuries would only worsen. As her voice fell, Sakura Asaka stepped down from the platform, and her eyes were filled with regret. Xiao, Ryugan River leaped into the air, and his body was like a ferocious spiritual beast. His sword light was resplendent, and within the sword light, there was a strange mist. It was as if countless sword lights were spreading out, and it enveloped Oloa. Clang, clang. The shock was ear-piercing, and the aura was surging. The sound of wind and thunder rumbled, and the air in the surrounding void was shaken. Such a scene made everyone's eyes tremble. Visible to the naked eye, Ryugan River's countless sword lights were suddenly filled with resplendent light, and all of them merged towards the center. The light became more and more dazzling, as if it was going to pierce through space. Everyone's eyes were filled with horror. They could feel the inexplicable aura from afar, and they were all frightened. They also understood that no one could block such a sword. Olua used all his strength, and his face was extremely solemn. His body was covered by a yuan qi light shield. But in the end, the sword destroyed everything, and it also pierced through Olua's yuan qi light shield, and finally pierced into his shoulder. Chila. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and blood flowed from Olua's shoulder. His face was ashen. Thank you for showing mercy. I've lost. Olua put away the sword in his hand, and looked at Ryugan River with a bitter smile. He was very clear that if Ryugan River had not shown mercy, the sword would not have pierced into his shoulder. Thank you for letting me win. Ryugan River put away his sword and nodded at Olua with a smile in his eyes. What's there to be grateful for? I already knew that I couldn't beat you, Olua said, and then turned to leave the arena. Ryugan River, Yin Lingfeng, they are indeed the first and second in the Sword Pagoda rankings. On the high platform, the elders and protectors sighed. Elder by Mingshan laughed very happily. Perhaps at the end of the day, The true strength of the disciple that he was most proud of would shock all the elders. After all, he had endured for so long, and it was all for the sake of the myriad sword conference. His proud disciple would soar into the sky. Clang! Congratulations to Su Yi, Mu Yao, Yinling Feng, and Ryugan River for advancing to the next round. There will be no rest in the middle, and you will continue to the next round. Your opponents will depend on your luck. At the same time that the bell on the high platform rang, Protector Ho Changming's voice reverberated through the arena. After the first 2 rounds, there was still half an incense stick's worth of time to rest and adjust. But in the next round, there was no time to rest. Hua! As this round ended, the clamor and cheers soared into the sky, and it was deafening. Chapter 540. However, the fact that Mu Yao and Su Yi had also made it to the top left the onlookers dumbfounded. In the crowd, Fu Tingwang and Fu Tingming's eyes were filled with malice. This was a result they didn't want to see. Boom! At the same time, the remaining 4 huge dueling platforms flickered with light again. On the quaint and modeled dueling platforms, mysterious inscriptions filled the air again. The whole square seemed to be trembling as the aura was vast and mighty. The 4 dueling platforms moved in the square and rumbled continuously. They crisscrossed and moved in different directions. Rumble! Immediately after, the 4 stages collided and merged, becoming 2 even larger stages facing each other from afar. On one dueling platform, Mu Yao and Ryugan River faced each other from distance. On the other dueling platform, Su Yi and Yunling Feng faced each other from distance. This kind of duel caused everyone present to be rather surprised. It seems that Mu Yao is going to be defeated. Su Yi is very strong, but he's going to be defeated. Among the onlookers, some people were discussing. Mu Yao and Su Yi were going to face Ryugan River and Yunling Feng, who were ranked 1st and 2nd in the Sword Pagoda. They were afraid that both of them would be defeated. Few people believed that Mu Yao and Su Yi could defeat Ryugan River and Yunling Feng, who were ranked 1st and 2nd in the Sword Pagoda. Come on, boss Su Yi. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Tan Chao, and the others had already retreated to the side. They had been nervously watching the results of the dueling platforms. At this moment, they clenched their fists and looked nervous. They were silently cheering for Su Yi, as if they were more nervous than if they were going to fight. This is going to be interesting. On the high platform, many elders and protectors were looking forward to the duel. Such a duel seemed to be quite interesting. Elders, what do you think? Which 2 will enter the next round? At the head of the platform, Situ Luyun asked the 2nd elder and 3rd elder beside him in a low voice. It's really hard to say, 2nd elder said. Right now, even he couldn't see the result, unable to rashly come to a conclusion. In my opinion, the 4 of them are still holding back. I'm afraid there will be a fierce battle to determine who is stronger and who is weaker. 3rd elder said, TSK, this is great. That brat is courting death. Among the crowd, Fu Tongming and Fu Tingwang sneered. This was Su Yi, that brat, seeking his own death. He actually went against the people he shouldn't have. This time, Su Yi is going to be in trouble. Senior brother Yunling Feng will definitely not let him off. Many disciples on the 15th Sword Peak smiled as well. It could be said that the 15th Sword Peak was suppressed by Su Yi and became the laughingstock of the entire Shunjian Gate. Now, only Yunling Feng could prove the strength of the 15th Sword Peak. You're an elder. Please make the first move. Amidst the heated discussion, Ryugan River bowed to Mu Yao on the battle platform. However, his body was tall and straight, and he still had a lonely and cold posture. You're the one who has always been the first in the Sword Pagoda, but you talk too much nonsense. Mu Yao said lightly. Her red lips were delicate, and her body was slender under the orange robe. She had a peerless beauty. At this moment, there was no smile on her face, but there was a kind of seductive beauty. Swish! As soon as her voice fell, Mu Yao directly made her move. Her slender, jade-like hand brushed past, and in the bright primordial chi light, there was a sword light that directly swept out. However, it could be seen that at this moment, Mu Yao's expression was not careless. Facing Ryugan River, Mu Yao also knew that this guy was much stronger than Gu Chenyu, so she took him more seriously. Ryugan River's eyes moved, and the soles of his feet stomped on the battle platform. His primordial chi surged, and suddenly, there began to be bright electric arcs that began to wreak havoc around his body. A sword also appeared in his hand, and an electric sword light met the attack. Rumble. The muffled sound was like thunder, and on this side of the battle platform, there's suddenly lightning flashing and thunder roaring. At this moment, Ryugan River seemed to have felt something. His body was wrapped in thunder and lightning, and between his movements, a terrifying aura was monstrous, filled with killing intent. The aura was strong, and it swept towards Mu Yao. Such a movement also immediately attracted Su Yi's attention. Thunder attribute. Su Yi was a little surprised. In addition to the 5 attributes of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, there were 2 recognized special attributes in this world. One was the thunder attribute, and the other was the wind attribute. It was rumored that warriors with these 2 special attributes would be extremely powerful. After so long, this was the first time Su Yi saw someone with the thunder attribute. He did not expect Ryugan River to be a thunder attribute warrior. His gaze swept across Mu Yao, and Su Yi realized that although Ryugan River's killing intent was strong, Mu Yao was still calmly facing him. Swish, 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 swish. Ryugan River drew his sword, and, at this moment, the sword was wrapped in electric arcs. The sword light was like a burst of lightning, and the electric arcs bloomed like lightning, causing the battle platform to be dazzling. Swish, swish. Mu Yao did not retreat at all. The sword in her hand emitted the sound of wind and thunder, and the sword light filled the air, blocking the former's attacks time and time again. This battle between a man and a woman was like a ferocious beast or a spiritual bird flying through the air. One was strong and murderous, while the other was graceful and moving. Mu Yao's expression was calm. Her orange robe fluttered in the wind, and as she waved her sword, she occasionally revealed her white lotus arms. Her skin was as white as snow, and her beautiful hair fluttered in the wind. Her posture was moving. You being able to reach this step has really exceeded my expectations. Just as Su Yi was sizing up the battle between Mu Yao and Ryugan River, such a voice faintly sounded in front of him. 2. Most % New C. Chapter 9, Why Above Looking Back. Su Yi saw Yun Lingfeng slowly walking over, and there was not much concealment in his eyes. Step by step, Yun Lingfeng's cold eyes stared at Su Yi and said, "But it's also good. At least now you have nowhere to run. Everything you owe will be repaid in front of everyone on this battle platform." Su Yi did not like this Yun Lingfeng. His eyebrows twitched and said, "I don't remember owing you anything, and I don't think I have ever owed you anything. Fu Tingming's hand was crippled by you, right? He's my cousin." Light flickered under Yun Lingfeng's feet. It seemed that he had only taken a few steps, but he had already reached the center of the battle platform. He stopped slightly, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He continued to say to Su, "You also owe the humiliation of the 15th Sword Peak. You also have to pay for your actions in the battlefield of 10,000 swords." "I see." Su Yi smiled. So Yun Lingfeng and Fu Tangming were cousins, and he also wanted to stand up for the disciples of the 15th Sword Peak. Indifferently raising his eyes, Su Yi said, "Fu Tangming and the disciples of the 15th Sword Peak can't blame others. You'd better not provoke me. My temper is not good, and I won't be polite to you." Hearing Su Yi's words, Yun Lingfeng was not too surprised, and the corners of his eyes subtly twitched. Yun Lingfeng had indeed wanted to stand up for the disciples of the 15th Sword Peak, as well as the Fu brothers, Fu Tangming and Fu Tingwang. However, after entering the battlefield of 10,000 swords, he had been played by Su Yi time and time again. Even the mystical spirit fruit, which he had thought was as easy as pie, had been snatched away by Su Yi. The hatred in his heart was no longer the same as before. No matter what, he was going to trample on this brat today. He had endured for so long in order to soar to the heavens in the Myriad Sword Conference today. He was a truly invincible existence, and he would not allow anyone to jump around in front of him. The mystical spirit fruit was something that he must obtain. Brat, you do have some potential and strength, but there are some people you can't afford to provoke. Even if you're Elder Su's disciple, I won't be able to protect you today. But don't worry, I won't kill you, but you will pay the price. Yin Lingfeng looked at Su Yi with a cold expression and said indifferently, "Of course, if you are afraid, you can kneel down and kowtow to admit defeat. Perhaps I will consider letting you go. However, I hope that you dare to fight with me. Only then will I be able to cripple you. Senior brother, Yin Lingfeng, teach that brat a good lesson." In the crowd, the disciples of the 15th Sword Peak shouted loudly. The humiliation that the 15th Sword Peak suffered would be avenged today. Looks like Yin Lingfeng won't let Su Yi off so easily. In the battlefield of 10,000 swords, Su Yi also played Yin Lingfeng. This is going to be troublesome, some people discussed in a low voice. Looking at the situation in the arena, they could feel that Yin Lingfeng wouldn't let Su Yi off. "Boss Su Yi, you can do it." Seeing that Su Yi's opponent was Yin Lingfeng, who was ranked second in the Sword Pagoda, Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, Wang Fan, and the others were watching from afar, and their hearts were in their throats. On the high platform, Elder by Mingshan looked calm, and a faint sneer flashed across his eyes. Su Yi stood quietly with his sword and saber crossed behind his back. The cheers around him could be heard clearly, and it seemed that many people were gloating. When he arrived at the Divine Sword Sect, although Su Yi had no intention of joining the Divine Sword Sect, at least he was now in the Divine Sword Sect. In order to avoid future troubles, if he wanted to have a peaceful life in the Divine Sword Sect, he needed an absolute deterrence. "As you wish, I'll give you the chance to cripple me." Su Yi slowly walked forward with a slight smile on his handsome face. However, his deep eyes flickered with a scarlet cold light. Yin Lingfeng, who was in front of him, was the most suitable person for absolute intimidation. Moreover, Su Yi had already decided that if Yin Lingfeng really came to provoke him, he wouldn't be polite. Su Yi could more or less sense Yin Lingfeng's cultivation strength. He might have already stepped into the 6th level of Origin Spirit stage or above. But so what? There was nothing to be afraid of. Su Yi had already reached a higher level. Even if he was at the 7th level of Origin Spirit stage, it wouldn't be a big deal. Good, at least you have some guts. You don't only know how to run away like last time. Looking at Su Yi, who was slowly walking over, Yin Lingfeng's brows turned cold. His right foot took half a step to the side, and the aura on his body slowly fluctuated. Then, the surrounding wind whistled and surged, enveloping the entire arena. Chapter 541. Wind Attribute Yuan Qi. Su Yi's eyes moved. This was Wind Attribute Yuan Qi. Yin Lingfeng possessed both the metal and wind attributes. To be able to create such a formation with just the Yuan Qi in his body, it was clear that Yin Lingfeng was not an idiot. Crash! At the same time, as Su Yi slowly walked out, a strong Yuan Qi also spread out from his body, with his body as the center, forming a reverse airflow vortex. In an instant, the sharp wind that surged into Su Yi's body was completely destroyed and assimilated. Under everyone's gaze, Su Yi walked towards Yin Lingfeng step by step, as if taking a stroll in the storm, appearing very relaxed. One can create such a scene with Yuan Qi, and the other can neutralize it with the same wind attribute. Both of them have amazing attainments in controlling Yuan Qi. On the high platform, watching this scene, some elders and protectors were amazed. Although Yin Lingfeng and Su Yi's fight was not as violent as Ryugan River's and Mu Yao's, the means they displayed were also amazing. To be able to control the wind attribute Yuan Qi to counteract the suppression of the storm, and to do it so easily, this means that the control of Yuan Qi is even more difficult. The second elder, Zhang Sun Luhen, said softly, his eyes flickering. Outside the inner arena, the defeated Gongqi, Sakura, Asaka, Gu Chunyu, Oluo, Zhang Lingyun, Jianxi, and the other outstanding direct disciples also looked at the remaining 2 battle stages. Ing Qianqian, Gu Chunyu, and the others all frowned inwardly when they saw everything the remaining 4 had displayed. They knew very well that their defeats were indeed not enough to compare to the other 4. On the battle stage, looking at Su Yi, who was still walking over step by step, Yin Lingfeng's face gradually turned pale. Originally, Yin Lingfeng wanted Su Yi to make a fool of himself in front of everyone. However, he did not expect that Su Yi would be able to deal with it so easily. The suppression he created did not seem to be a threat to the former at all. On the contrary, it allowed the latter to gain a little limelight. How could the proud and arrogant Yin Lingfeng, who wanted to soar to the heavens, accept this? Golden light shaking heaven's seal. A cold shout came out from Yin Lingfeng's mouth. The Yuan Qi in his body quickly transformed into metal attribute Yuan Qi and gushed out. The entire duel stage was dyed with a golden light that was sharp and frightening. Wave after wave of terrifying power spread out in front of Yin Lingfeng. Boom! Under the terrifying aura, the entire battle stage seemed to be affected. In an instant, the resplendent golden Yuan Qi radiated from Yin Lingfeng's body. He waved his arm and slapped out. A palm print instantly condensed. The palm was densely covered with golden light, revealing mysterious patterns. Its aura made people's hearts palpitate. Qila, Yin Lingfeng's figure was like a flash of lightning. With the wind attribute, his speed could be imagined. With a terrifying aura, he charged fiercely towards Su Yi. Yin Lingfeng used his full strength right from the start. This kind of power caused the expressions of the elders and protectors on the high platform to change slightly. When the former's aura suddenly changed, Su Yi also stopped in his tracks. Looking at the figure that was as fast as lightning and the terrifying golden palm print, Su Yi's lips curled into a cold arc. This Yin Lingfeng was really vicious. He no longer had the heart of a duel. Instead, he showed no mercy to Su Yi. I said that I will cripple you. A mosquito-like voice entered Su Yi's ears. In front of him, Yin Lingfeng's figure was already like a flash of lightning. The golden palm print in Su Yi's eyes grew larger and larger. Its terrifying aura, coupled with its astonishing speed, sealed off the surroundings. All of this made it impossible for Su Yi to retreat, even if he wanted to. However, at this moment, Su Yi's face did not have any serious expression. Only a dazzling light surged in his deep eyes. At the same time, a dazzling wind attribute Yuan Qi erupted from Su Yi's body. It was like a white sun that erupted from the battle stage. Boom! Accompanied by a brilliant radiance, it shook the entire battle stage. This dazzling white light instantly enveloped Su Yi's entire body. Under the dazzling light, the surrounding disciples could not look directly at it. Su Yi's figure seemed to be enveloped by it and disappeared in the light. This guy actually wants to use his Yuan Qi defense to block Yin Lingfeng's golden light sky shaking seal. Is he courting death? Is Su Yi that brat so arrogant? He actually wants to use his Yuan Qi defense to block Yin Lingfeng's golden light sky shaking seal. I'm afraid that Su Yi will not be able to dodge it. This is the only way. Among the spectators, some disciples exclaimed in shock. The elders and protectors on the high platform all revealed looks of astonishment. In an instant, Yin Lingfeng's golden light sky shaking seal had already fiercely landed on the dazzling wind attribute Yuan Qi. Rumble. Such a collision caused the entire battle stage to tremble violently, following which the dazzling golden light and the dazzling white light formed a violent energy storm. It swept out like a hurricane, causing cracks to appear in the air. An earth-shattering hurricane erupted from the battle stage in a circular shape. The scene was terrifying. The terrifying energy storm caused people to shudder in fear even from afar. Many of the disciples present were well aware that they had no power to resist the shockwaves from the shockwaves that had spread out. That Su Yi is too arrogant. Is he courting death? Such a terrifying commotion made many people even more certain that Su Yi was too arrogant. In the face of an existence like Yin Ling Feng, Su Yi actually wanted to use his Yuan Qi shield to resist. This was definitely courting death. He courting death. In the crowd, Fu Tongming and Fu Tingguang sneered. They were afraid that even if Su Yi was lucky enough to survive, he would be crippled. Boss Su Yi, you have a hold on. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, Tan Xiao, and the others trembled. They clenched their fists so tightly that their nails dug into their flesh. Only Situ Muyang, although his face was pale, did not show the slightest hint of nervousness as he looked at the chaotic battle stage. Situ Muyang was very clear about Su Yi's trump card. How could his junior martial uncle be defeated so easily? Courting death, plus SROZ, the wind in front of him swept out like a hurricane. The aura on Yun Lingfeng's body also relaxed a little as a cold smile appeared on his face. Yun Lingfeng knew his own strength the best. How could that brat withstand his golden light heaven-shaking seal? Even if he did not die, he would be crippled. Boom! It was a long story, but in this short moment, just as Yun Lingfeng finished muttering to himself, the space in front of him suddenly trembled. A bright scarlet light burst out from the front. Swish! This scarlet light was resplendent as it swooped down from the sky. It was completely beyond anyone's expectations. It was too quick. The bright crimson light that swooped down immediately transformed into a skinny figure. Under the shocked and stunned gazes of the entire place, the figure directly appeared in front of Yun Lingfeng. A clear face appeared in front of Yun Lingfeng's eyes. It was already very close. Who else could it be other than Su Yi? What was even more shocking was that Su Yi was floating at a low altitude. A pair of scarlet wings spread out from his back. They were flowing with light. They were as thin as a cicada's wings, and the arc was beautiful and agile. Not good. Yin Lingfeng looked at the face that appeared in front of him in an instant. It did not look like anything had happened. Even the clothes on his body were not damaged. At this moment, Yin Lingfeng's expression changed greatly. Instantly, shock surged from the depths of his eyes. At this moment, his body rapidly retreated, and at the same time, he was about to attack again. However, it was too late. A palm was already rapidly expanding in his eyes. Pa! The crisp sound of a slap resounded on the arena. The sound was incomparably clear. Immediately after, under the astonished gazes of the crowd, Yun Lingfeng was sent flying. His body smashed onto the arena, and finally, he skidded across the ground for a while before stopping his retreat. Other than the shocking collision on the next arena, the entire arena was deathly silent. At this moment, almost half of the gazes in the entire arena were staring blankly at the arena where Su Yi and Yun Lingfeng were fighting. The surrounding disciples were all dumbfounded. They were so stunned that they were unable to recover from their shock. Many disciples' jaws were wide open, and they were unable to retract them for a long time. A single slap sent Yun Lingfeng flying. If they did not see it with their own eyes, how could they believe it? Moreover, even if they saw it with their own eyes, they were still unable to accept this fact in their hearts. Fu Tongguang, Fu Tongming, and the disciples on the 15th Sword Peak were all dumbfounded. They were originally cheering and shouting, but at this moment, they could not retract their open jaws. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. They originally thought that with Yun Lingfeng taking action, Su Yi would definitely be trampled. However, they never thought that with just one move, Yun Lingfeng, who they were incomparably confident in, who had always been ranked second in the Sword Pagoda, would actually be sent flying by Su Yi with a single slap. Even if they saw it with their own eyes, they were still unable to accept this fact. This was too shocking. Oh my God! Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, and the other disciples could not help but rub their eyes when they saw the scene on the arena. They were also completely in disbelief. Only Sita Muyang was not too surprised. His expression was calm, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. He had long known that Yun Lingfeng could not do anything to Sui. Look, Sui can actually fly. What kind of technique is that? Some disciples exclaimed in astonishment. Wasn't Sui at the origin spirit realm? He could actually fly without Yuan Qi transformation. At this moment, the guardian elders on the high platform were all shocked, and their expressions changed. Situ Liuyun's gaze surged, and her expression changed quite a bit. There was another elder whose expression changed the most at this moment. It was Elder by Mingshan. Chapter 542. What kind of technique did Sui use to actually be able to fly in the air, to be able to make Yun Lingfeng suffer in a single move? This Sui is truly unfathomable. Some of the protectors and elders could not help but exclaim in admiration. This had truly shocked them. It's not a treasure, but a pair of wings condensed from Yuan Qi. It should be a movement martial skill, and I'm afraid that it's at least at the royal grade. The second elder's eyes shone brightly. At this moment, his expression seemed to be very excited. He had sent some clues. The technique that Sui was currently using seemed to be a movement martial skill, an identity martial skill at the royal grade. This brat is only at the origin spirit stage. How did he manage to successfully learn it? Hearing the second elder's words, some of the elders and protectors were even more stunned and confused. A movement martial skill of the royal grade was absolutely not something that could be casually learned. Yun Lingfeng stood up from the dueling stage, some dark red blood stains at the corner of his mouth. Half of his face was red and swollen, with a clear palm print appearing. The expression and gaze on his face were still filled with disbelief and shock. However, when he looked at Sui, it completely turned dark and cold, while his face was extremely gloomy and ashen. Good, good, good. Ha ha ha. After saying good 3 times in a row, Yun Lingfeng stared at Sui with an extremely dark and cold gaze. Soon after, he laughed out of extreme anger. However, anyone could hear that this laughter was filled with extreme dark and cold hatred. When the dark and cold laughter stopped, a new wind attribute aura was released from Yun Lingfeng's body, abruptly rising. As Yuan Qi surged, it was astonishing. Accompanied by the howling winds, it rushed straight into the clouds. In a short instant, a surging aura surged from Yun Lingfeng's body like a hurricane, howling as it rose. The entire dueling stage was surging with wind and clouds, a terrifying sight. This is when they sensed the aura from Yun Lingfeng's body. Some people cried out in alarm. It's actually reached this step. I was really careless earlier. The eyes of the protectors and elders on the high platform were extremely sharp. Instantly, their expressions changed inwardly. From the looks of it, Yun Lingfeng had really been a little careless earlier. Peak 6th level origin spirit stage. I'm afraid that he's very close to the 7th level origin spirit stage. Third elder Wu Chaoyang's eyes were currently filled with admiration. At Yun Lingfeng's age, he had already stepped into the 7th level origin spirit stage. Such talent was absolutely rare. Peak 6th level origin spirit stage, 7th level soon. At this moment, he was not surprised. To Yun Lingfeng, this was Yun Lingfeng. I was careless and gave you a chance to show off. But now, you have to pay me back 100-fold. Just 6th level origin spirit stage. I'm afraid that's a little too early to say that. The Yuan Qi wings behind Sui's back flapped. Scarlet light filled the air. What was a peak 6th level origin spirit stage cultivation? It was not as if he had never fought someone above his level before. You will pay a heavy price for this. Yun Lingfeng's eyes were cold. His gaze was intimidating. Killing intent filled the air. His face was ashen. Boom! At the same time, light erupted from beneath Yun Lingfeng's feet, following which the illusory image of a several feet large Yuan Qi beast appeared. Awoo! A wolf howl shook the heavens as a lifelike giant wolf appeared. The giant wolf had a pair of wings on its back. It howled savagely. Its entire body was white like crystal. Its pair of ferocious eyes were incomparably blood-red, like two miniature blood moons twinkling. The giant wolf's fangs were gleaming. Its aura was ferocious and ruthless, emitting a terrifying demonic aura. Blood-eyed, demonic wind wolf. Sui took a few more glances at the giant wolf's illusory image. He was inwardly moved. This was a blood-eyed demonic wind wolf whose bloodline had reached the demonic clan level. It was much stronger than the wolf-headed demonic bat's bloodline. If one wanted to obtain the blood essence of a demonic beast of this level to transform Yuan Qi, it would be absolutely impossible if one did not have a powerful backer. When the blood-eyed demonic wind wolf appeared, it glowed brightly. Mysterious symbols surged as a savage aura undulated. As if it had a life of its own, it immediately erupted and charged towards Sui. Chapter 543. Dang, 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 dang. At this moment, the arena where Mu Yao and Ryugan River were located also erupted with the sound of metal clashing, deafening everyone's eardrums. Walala! Sword radiance burst forth from the arena, making it hard for people to look straight at it. Chila! In the aftermath of the strong wind, Ryugan River's figure retreated. His body was suffused with lightning, and electric arcs were fluctuating. He staggered for more than 10 steps before stabilizing his body. The sword in his hand let out a trembling sound, the light dimming, and cracks appearing. Ryugan River's neat hair was also disheveled at this moment. His cloud robe was torn in several places, and a trace of dark red blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Mu Yao's delicate body only took 2 steps back. She was enveloped by Yuan Qi radiance, giving off a sense of majesty. Ryugan River is actually at a disadvantage. There were also many people watching from the arena. Ryugan River, who was ranked first in the Sword Pagoda, was actually at a disadvantage. This made many people feel apprehensive. Even the elders and protectors on the high platform were visibly moved. The elders and guardians were also surprised that the second and first in the Sword Pagoda, Yin Lingfeng and Ryugan River, were defeated one after another in such a short period of time. The commotion on the other side of the arena made Sui turn to look over. Senior brother Ryugan River is injured. The surrounding disciples were shocked and in disbelief. Ryugan River, who was ranked first in the Sword Pagoda, was actually injured. Is he going to use his Yuan Qi to transform? Head X, 6 equals some disciples looked nervous. Ryugan River's Yuan Qi transformed into an extraordinary beast shadow. It was a cloud leopard at the demon race level. Back when Ryugan River and Yin Lingfeng fought, Ryugan River and the Yuan Qi transformed beast shadow suppressed Yin Lingfeng with a violent lightning attribute. Lu Yunchuan's figure retreated, and the expression on his face became completely solemn. Boom! Suddenly, under everyone's astonished gazes, Ryugan River put away the sword in his hand. At the same time, from his feet, a new surge of lightning rose. The lightning was fierce and murderous. It instantly covered his entire body. It was resplendent and blazing, entangling with the Yuan Qi in his body and covering his entire body. "What is that?" someone in the crowd exclaimed. Amidst the dazzling lightning, Ryugan River's body was covered in a suit of armor. The battle armor was simple and unadorned. It was green and white in color, and the aura of thunder and lightning was released. Its entire body shone, and electrical arcs flickered with ZZ sounds. A terrifying aura pervaded the air. When the battle armor was set up, the aura on Ryugan River's body had clearly changed. The mighty aura in his body erupted, and in an instant, it swept across like a storm, causing the sky above the arena to churn. Lightning filled the air and blocked the view. Rumble! Thunder resounded and lightning flashed. The aura was ancient and terrifying. Peak of the 7th level Origin Spirit Realm. Everyone's eyes trembled. At this moment, the aura on Ryugan River's body had already reached the peak of the 7th level origin spirit realm. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled around his body. At this moment, Ryugen River was like a young thunder god. His aura soared, and he was much stronger than before. He had displayed his true strength. My God, this is Ryugen River's true strength. No wonder he's number 1 in the Sword Pagoda. There must be a reason why the number 1 in the Sword Pagoda exists. Senior brother Ryugen River has always been an invincible existence. Everyone's eyes trembled. The gazes that were originally on Su Yi and Yun Lingfeng's arena were also attracted by the huge commotion caused by the lightning flashing and thunder rumbling. That is, on the high platform, the gazes of the elders and protectors were also stunned when they saw the lightning battle armor on Ryugen River's body. With the eyesight of these elders, how could they not see that the mysterious and ancient lightning battle armor on Ryugen River's body was much more astonishing than the aura of the peak 7th level origin spirit realm? It was definitely a precious treasure. He obtained it from the myriad sword battlefield. An elder in the elders' seating area spoke up, his eyes smiling as he explained to everyone. Ryugen River was this elder's disciple. The lightning battle armor was something that Ryugen River had obtained from the myriad sword battlefield. It was a great opportunity. No wonder. The eyes of the elders and protectors trembled. They were aware of the mysteries of the myriad sword battlefield, so they did not find it strange. It was no wonder that Ryugen River was the last to walk out of the myriad sword battlefield, and the sword pattern stone he obtained was only barely enough to enter the top 68. It turned out that Ryugen River had encountered such a great opportunity in the myriad sword battlefield, which delayed him. Peak 7th level origin spirit realm. How astonishing. Some protectors were shocked. Yun Lingfeng's cultivation at the peak 6th level origin spirit realm was already shocking enough. Who would have thought that Ryugen River had actually reached the peak 7th level origin spirit realm? Very strong. Su Yi's gaze was attracted as he looked at Ryugen River covered in lightning battle armor. The aura of the peak 7th level origin spirit realm, coupled with the simple and unadorned lightning battle armor that was even stronger than Situ Muyang's wind-riding battle armor, was definitely powerful. Although Su Yi had not been careless about today's Myriad Sword Conference, he still had some confidence in his heart. However, at this moment, Su Yi truly did not dare to underestimate Ryugen River. The Xinjiang Gate was indeed a large sect. Generally speaking, none of these direct disciples were weak, and each one was stronger than the other. They had all sorts of trump cards and could not be underestimated. At this moment, Su Yi reckoned that if he were to face off against Ryugen River, if he did not use all of his trump cards, he really did not know if he could win. At this moment, Mu Yao's eyes also surged with a hint of seriousness. In her heart, she did not underestimate Lu Yunchuan. At this moment, after feeling the aura on Lu Yunchuan's body, she was even more cautious. Since you're stronger than I imagined, then I won't hold back. Ryugen River did not waste any words. As his voice rang out, electric arcs surged as a ferocious lightning aura rushed towards the heavens. A large patch of electric arcs rushed out, resplendent and dazzling, causing one's heart to palpitate as they swept towards Mu Yao. You're also stronger than I imagined. You're qualified for me to have a real battle. The sword in Mu Yao's hand also disappeared. She quickly condensed a handprint, and her orange robe fluttered in the wind. The water attribute primordial chi in her body turned into metal attribute primordial chi in an instant. Golden light pervaded the air. Her white, jade-like palm shot out, carrying a sharp and incomparably vast aura. Thunder and lightning surged. Ryugen River's offensive fiercely shot out and immediately collided with Mu Yao's white palm. Golden light, accompanied by electric arcs, formed an energy storm, and the aftermath of the strong wind spread like a hurricane. The scene was violent and terrifying. Rumble. It was not clear whether it was the muffled sound of the collision of energy or the explosion of thunder and lightning. The entire battle stage trembled. If it were not for the restriction seal placed by the powerhouses of Xinjiang Gate on Lingjian Peak, it would have collapsed directly at this moment. Ding ding. The two figures staggered back together. Their eyes were filled with surprise. It seemed that they did not expect the other party to be so powerful. Oh my God! From time to time, some of the onlookers could not help but exclaim. Such two people, unexpectedly, were able to fight to this extent. It was so terrifying. Not bad at all. Our Xinjiang gate is really lucky. On the high platform, there were elders and protectors who could not help but tremble. They were excited and happy. Whether it was Ryugan River or Mu Yao, with such strength and talent compared to their peers in the whole continent, they were definitely the leaders. This was the fortune of Xinjiang Gate. Situ Luyun, the second elder, and the third elder's eyes were also filled with light at this moment. However, there were no waves in their eyes. It could be seen that they were shocked in their hearts. Boom! Ryugan River did not say anything. An unparalleled aura of thunder and lightning surged from his body. After stabilizing his retreat, he took advantage of the momentum and jumped up. He directly slammed his palm towards Mu Yao, bringing along a violent and murderous wind of thunder and lightning. The wind and clouds in the void surged, and the electric arcs were terrifying. Mu Yao's face was dignified. At this moment, the golden light on her body was fluctuating. She was calm as usual. A strange golden color surged from her eyes, as if they were cast in gold. Her fair and jade-like hands moved across the void and met the palm print above her. Mu Yao did not dodge. She met the attack directly. At this moment, her beauty and strength were combined. She was beautiful and terrifying. Rumble. At this moment, the two of them continued to fight. Their auras were even more vigorous than before. Ryugan River was covered in thunder and lightning armor. He was like the thunder god. He was strong and murderous as he continued to attack. Mu Yao's body was covered in golden light. Her attacks became sharp and domineering. The two of them were too strong. In the midst of the thunder and lightning, they continued to attack and collide. Shocking power erupted from them. This terrifying battle made people tremble in fear just by looking at it from afar. A muffled groan could be heard. On this side of the arena, Yun Lingfeng, who was lying on the ground, struggled to stand up. He was in an extremely sorry state, and his hair was disheveled. When Yun Lingfeng stood up shakily, his handsome face was badly mutilated. It might be an exaggeration to say that it was a bloody mess. However, with blood stains and a swollen face, even his own mother would not be able to recognize him. Yin Lingfeng had just been slapped on the arena by Su Yi with his face flat on the ground. One could imagine how he looked like. His nose and forehead were smashed. It was too horrible to look at. Seeing Yin Lingfeng climb up, many people in the arena turned back to look at him. When they looked at Yin Lingfeng at this moment, everyone could not help but feel a chill down their spines. Su Yi was too ruthless. Some female disciples looked at Yun Lingfeng's miserable face at this moment. All the beautiful fantasies in their hearts were suddenly shattered. There were also female disciples who were heartbroken and scolded Su Yi in their hearts. Although Su Yi was distracted by the battle between Ryugan River and Mu Yao for a while, he had been secretly staring at Yun Lingfeng. At this moment, he immediately withdrew his gaze and quietly looked at Yun Lingfeng. Yin Lingfeng stared at Su Yi. On his blood-stained and miserable face, the shock in his eyes did not dissipate for a long time. His eyes were dull, and it was difficult for him to recover. It seemed that even now he still could not believe that he had been ravaged like this. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion suddenly came out from the adjacent dueling platform and resounded throughout the Spirit Sword Peak. Rumble! In an instant, there was thunder and lightning, and golden light burst out. It was extremely terrifying. Puff! In the monstrous wind, Ryugan River's body staggered back again, and blood spilled from his mouth again. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.